Hey guys, Graham here from the Recording Revolution, and welcome to Rethink Mixing. I am so excited that you're here. This video series is going to be a blast. We are going to go through mixing an entire song from raw tracks to polished mix. It's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to learn a lot, but I want to take 3 seconds to thank you so much for picking up this video. If you're a first-time customer, this is your first video you've ever purchased, I want to say thanks for supporting the revolution. Thanks for believing in me as your teacher and having me here with you. I promise to not disappoint you, that you're going to learn a lot. You're going to enjoy yourself. And if you're a returning customer, if you've purchased any of my other videos, I want to thank you so much for really being the catalyst for this video series and all the ones to come, because I started with one product. A lot of people enjoyed it, and I started to get feedback on, hey, could you do something on this? Could you do something on this? And it's you guys that drive me to do what I do. And the Recording Revolution and all the videos exist purely to help you make better music. I don't want to just teach you something just for the sake of teaching it. I want you to then take these techniques and this education that you're getting and go apply it in the real world so that your music sounds better, so your mixes sound better, so you're having more fun making better music now and not creeping along at a snail's pace. I want you to get better now. All right, so I wanted to say thank you. It's going to be a fun ride. Hang in there. I think you're really going to learn a lot and enjoy a lot, and I hope this is a resource that you can reference for years to come. What we're going to do in this mixing series is take a song that's completely raw and mix it from start to finish, okay? I have a song that was literally recorded in somebody's basement, okay? This is a track that was recorded in somebody's basement. I know that because I did the recording, all right? I was there. So all of its great things, you can say, hey, great job, Graham. The mix sounds great. But all of its flaws and weaknesses in the recorded tracks, you know who to blame. Yep, yours truly. You can point your finger at me. This was recorded in a guy's townhouse basement, all right? The drums were recorded just down the street in the church because there's a little bit of extra room there compared to his basement for the drum set. Other than that, everything was tracked back in his basement, and nothing was in a professional studio. It was all recorded in a quick time frame. I do a lot of mobile recording. So the point of me saying that is that this is probably typical of a home studio recording for a lot of you guys. So what I want to show you is what you can do with home studio tracks, taking them to a radio ready polished mix. And if you can do that with these tracks, then you can do that with tracks that sound even better. If you can record better tracks than this, you're already that much closer to a great mix. We're going to look also at the way I like to approach mixing currently. There are a lot of different ways to mix. That's what's so exciting about mixing, is you'll read an article, listen to a producer, watch a video tutorial from somebody else, and they may all mix differently. All I care is that you get to the end with a great sounding mix. What I hope to do is show you one way of mixing that I find logical, that I find helpful, that I find musical, and is also easy for me to teach you a lot of the intricate processes along the way. Okay? Thirdly, what you're going to probably see is not only some really helpful tips, some really helpful tricks, some big view ways of looking at mixing, but you're also going to see a lot of small, mundane, uneventful tweaks that don't seem to make a huge difference, but adding up 1,000+ little tweaks to a song, that gives you a result of a good mix. It's the result of so many little changes, not usually one or two big changes. So if you're looking for a plugin that makes everything sound better, that's not really how mixes happen. It's strategically carving away, tweaking until at the very end, it's all sitting together nicely. So it might sneak up on you. Don't discredit the simple mundane moves that we make. I don't know your skill level, so some of this may be new, some of this may be old, but all of it will help you. What we're going to be mixing is a song by an artist named Joshua List. The song is called In This Death, and I've got it already edited, okay? I wanted to get the drums lined up, get anything pocketed, comp and tune the vocals, so this isn't an editing video. I wanted to be able to spend the entire time with you just on mixing. So if you need help learning how to edit your tracks, I know that editing is very important. Go check out some of my other videos on that. In the meantime, let's get down to mixing and let's look at how we can take these raw tracks and get them sounding polished. The first thing we have to do is listen to what we're dealing with. Let me press play and let you just listen to a good part of the song, all right? I'm going to just let it roll. Get a feel for what parts are there. Everything is at the same volume, so it will be a mess, okay? It will sound unbalanced, but that's what we're going to start with.
There's a face I love, despised by most, a man who suffered and bore the wrath alone. With tears in his eyes, and blood on his brow, the weight of every bitter blow bore him to the ground, bore him to the ground. He had no beauty, afflicted and crushed, and it pleased the Lord to let him bear judgment meant for us. In this death I tremble, sin a perfect match for every scar. In this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. In this death I find my peace in the suffering of the Lord, knowing that these hands and feet hold the saving mark is dead. From ashes to beauty, anguish to bliss.
All right, so that gives you a feel for a little bit about how the song goes. A little slow build up. You got that chorus happening. There's another verse, but really that chorus is the main hook, so you'll hear that again later on towards the end. So whether you've recorded this track or not, you have to go back and listen to it. You almost, especially if you are the person recording, editing, mixing, and even performing in the song. The way you get a good mix is to try to separate your roles as best as you can. I know everything is combined. You could have been mixing along the way while you're recording. I like to do away with all of that. I like to clear my head. As you saw, I've got no plugins. I've put all the faders up to 0. Everything is panned up the middle in mono. I haven't made any panning or volume decisions yet. And what we just did was listen to, either for the first time for you guys or for me the millionth time, even weeks, months after the recording session, listen to the song, go, okay, what is this song all about? There's a lot of things that we can learn right away. One is it's really kind of epic. It's kind of a melodic, creepy beginning, and then it builds into this just haunting rhythm. And the drums, when they finally come in, have this 6/8 feel. So it's got this continuous rhythm. The guitars even echo that. Kind of his guitar playing follows that. You've got strumming acoustic. The piano is kind of the big instrument here. It's obviously melodic, and then you can kind of tell when it comes into the chorus, it's doing just the eighth notes. The bun, 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 bun. All of that stuff you want to be listening to in your head and thinking, okay, dude, what is making this song really, really cool? What's the best part of this song? And what instruments are important? What section is the most epic? You want to get a feel for how the song goes. And this may seem really pedestrian for some of you guys. You want to jump into something fancy, but trust me, if you can start with a good foundation, the rest of the mixing will come really quick. You have to know what you want to do before you can do it. If you just start grabbing plugins and tweaking faders and pulling up presets to make a snare drum sound cool, you will have a mess on your hands. And that's why a lot of you guys are struggling with your mixes, is you don't have any intentionality or direction. You need to think like a musician again. What gets you excited about the song? For me, I love it when the drums come in. I love that rhythm, and I love the piano that gets real rhythmic with the drums and that main lead guitar part, which I think he doubles an octave lower. That's my favorite part. Vocals are going to fit nicely in that. The acoustic is kind of just filling it in. There's some violin filling in some stuff that's very legato. But I love the drums, piano, and lead guitar. Okay, that gets me excited. So what we need to do now that we have a feel for the song is we got to set up our first rough balance. We got to set the volumes for the first time. Because honestly, the volume that you choose to start your instruments and start your tracks at is probably the biggest deciding thing about how your mix is going to go. You know, a snare drum, if turned down, may sound kind of muffled. If that snare drum close mic track is turned up, you might get some more crack in the snare. Well, that's almost like an initial EQ decision, right? The volume of that snare drum mic relative to everything else affects the tonality that your ear hears. So if you just get the volume right, you may not need to EQ any crack on the snare. It may just be a volume issue. So we need to take a moment to set a good volume level, okay? Now, things won't be EQ'd, they won't be compressed, and we definitely won't have done any automation, so that means that we won't find a perfect balance, but you gotta start somewhere, and that's what we're gonna do first. What I like to do is find the most important part of the song, and that's what I'm gonna mix to start out with in this video and subsequent videos. What do I mean? I mean the part of the song where the most is happening musically, complexity, tonality wise, the big payoff of the song, the big part, whatever that is. That could be a bridge, that could be a massive guitar solo section, that could be the final chorus where everything is finally back in. The purpose is twofold. One, you probably then have all the instruments finally in so that you can get a balance with everything. You know, if you mix verse one, you may not have things like this final violin part or all the lead guitar parts. And in this song, you wouldn't even have any drums, right? Verse one's empty. So you want to start where there's all the tracks to play with, one. And then two, if you can get that section sounding amazing, it's a lot easier then to go to the rest of the song and tone it down a little bit so that in comparison, that big part sounds the biggest. If I spent all my time and energy initially on verse one or the intro, it may sound phenomenal. But then when I move to verse two and chorus one and chorus two, and heck, the final chorus, I find it very challenging to one up what I did in the verse to make that epic part at the end somehow sound bigger and more exciting than the beginning. You see what I'm saying? It's a real simple hack. Start with the biggest part first. You'll spend all your energy, all your time, and a lot of your best plugins and resources on the most important part of the song, and then it's much easier to work backwards, okay? So in this song, for me, it's probably gonna be this last main chorus here. There's this part, the hallelujah part, but it's actually a little less going on. All the guitars and all the violins, everything is right here in this chorus. Let's take a listen. Okay, so it's a mess right now, but what I'm going to do is select, and you can see here in Pro Tools, I've got some markers. This is labeled chorus. These markers were set when I started recording. So if you're recording a track, definitely set up markers so you know what is the verse, what is the chorus. But if you haven't done that yet, or you're getting some raw tracks, as you're doing that initial listen through that we started, put some markers in your DAW so you know, okay, sounds like a verse, this sounds like a chorus. That way you have a good visual on what you're looking at. So I know that I've selected chorus one all the way to this little post-chorus thing. And in Pro Tools, I've got loop playback set, just so that when I press play, once it gets to this section, it'll probably just loop right back, and it'll be a continuous selection on the most important part in my mind. So what I'm going to do is press play. We're going to flip over to my mix view, And I'm going to start playing with faders. I'm just going to start pulling things down and trying to get a rough balance on everything all at once. Later, we're going to start to zero in on instruments more specifically, but what I want to do is spend time just all the faders up at the same time, getting an initial balance and see where it takes us. I'm not going to mess with the panning right now. We'll do that in a second. So I'm going to press play, take a listen. All right, a little better, okay? We just, the violin was hot, his vocal was quiet, those electric guitars were hot, bass was kind of quiet because it's not been compressed. So I was just getting some initial levels just to start out with, just so I can hear things a little bit better, get things a little bit closer to where they need to be. The next thing I want to do is a mess with some panning, just initial panning, because we have obviously the stereo spectrum. Later, I'm going to show you a trick on how to really get your mix to sound great no matter what the stereo situation. But for now, we want to take advantage of panning to have an initial position to play with. Now, panning is obviously very simple. If you've messed with a DAW for any length of time, you know that you have a complete spectrum from 100 all the way to the left, hard left, all the way to hard right, and anywhere in between, because we're dealing with either stereo headphones or stereo speakers. For the most part, I'm not going to deal with surround sound in this mix because I'm just talking about regular radio mixing. Now, the idea is that obviously you can separate tracks by just using panning so that the ear can then separate them out and hear them all across the spectrum. Let me show you a little tip that I find super helpful, and it's called LCR panning. LCR panning stands for left, center, right. This is a very old concept, and basically it means you pretend that there is only 3 panning positions. Hard left, in this case, all the way to the left, hard right, or right up the middle, the center. All right, left, center, right. Now, what's the point of this? The point is that when we start mixing, myself included, when I was originally learning this and what I was taught in school was you spend time and you pan something maybe 25 to the left and this like 37, 43 to the left, to the right, and you give a little bit of a place for everything. Well, that sounds great to me in theory, and I did it because that's what people told me to do, and it made sense. Take advantage of every little in-between spot, and maybe I had just one thing hard left and right and a couple things up the middle. But the more I listened to radio recordings and professional recordings, even ones that aren't on the radio, the more I noticed that their mixes sounded wider and have more separation to me. And then I started to listen to some of these pro mixers, and all of these guys were saying, yeah, I just pan things hard left, hard right, up the middle. I was like, really? I mean, is that what they do? And the more I listened to their work and analyzed their mixes, the more I realized they are absolutely right. What's happening if you do LCR panning is you get things like your vocals, kick drum, snare drum right up the middle, right? Bass guitar right up the middle. You want those up the middle because they need to be coming out equally of both speakers for a lot of different reasons. And they're the focal point of any good song, right? Your rhythm, your bass, and your lead vocal. But if you pan everything else hard left and right, What that does is move the rest of the instruments as far away from those main instruments in the middle as possible, and what that gives you is complete separation. You get separation from the guitars from the vocal, the keys from the vocal. Everything is nice and separate, so you hear more clarity in your mix, which is what everybody's looking for. How do I get more clarity? How do I get more separation? Everything sounds jumbled. It sounds jumbled because you've jumbled them all together with panning. Why not separate them out as far as you can? That's the idea with LCR panning, and it's nothing new. You know, a lot of old mixers and consoles only had 3 pan positions anyway. That was the idea. Once stereo was involved, you had left, you had center, and you also had the middle. You didn't just have the middle anymore. It wasn't just mono. You added 2 other places, left and right, and that's phenomenal. The other big reason why this works is that most people aren't ever going to hear your fine-tuned panning positions, unfortunately. Unless they're listening in headphones and they're listening in a very quiet environment where they're just sitting and listening to your mix, they won't notice the slight pan to the right, the slight pan to the left, and everything in between. This is because when we listen on stereo speakers, most of us aren't sitting in the sweet spot, which is equidistant from those 2 speakers, meaning the moment we're out of that mixing zone or that sweet spot that you're sitting in while you mix, we lose all concept of the stereo spectrum. We don't hear the minute details and the balance issues that you spent hours sculpting. So in essence, the further away you get from that sweet spot, the more your mix sounds like a mono mix. All right? It just does, because both speakers are going to hit your ear kind of at the same time. You're not in between them. They're not to your left or your right. This is true if your iPod is sitting in your stereo in the kitchen or on your shelf and you're listening to a mix. This is true in your car where you're never sitting perfectly in between 2 speakers. This is true at the gym when you're hearing something coming out of the radio. Those are always mono. This is true even with headphones when you're working out or doing something. You're distracted. You're not really paying attention. You just hear the mix. The point is, you're going to waste a lot of time, in my opinion, if you spend time trying to get everything to kind of fit at 19, and this is going to be a 69. Most full arrangement mixes, meaning you got drums, bass, guitars, they benefit from just panning things hard left, hard right, and center. You get the most separation, it's very easy to mix, and it allows your mix to sound big and wide. Thanks for listening to that. I had to explain it because that's the way I mix, and you need to see what I'm doing. Give it a shot. People seem to buck up against it. I thought it was weird myself because I never did it, but it has really, really made an impact in my mixes. So that being said, I'm going to press play again, now with these rough initial levels, and I'm going to start putting things in the stereo field. All right? It'll help out a little bit. Let's press play.
In this death I tremble, I sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this
All right, really simple. I've got kick and snare up the center. I've got my high tom left, my floor tom right, my overheads left and right because they were positioned in a stereo field, so the toms will kind of follow that. And it'll make the toms pop out a little bit in the mix too, which is cool. The room mic I have up the middle because it's just a mono room mic. Bass up the middle. My acoustic guitar to the left. My piano is stereo for now. We'll keep it that way since it's a very piano-heavy song. One electric guitar is to the right, the other is to the left, and these are kind of an octave played thing, so take a listen. So they complement each other, right? Acoustic guitar, violin. Overheads. Kick and snare.
this death I remember.
Right? So he sang a harmony, and I had him double the harmony, and it's cool. For now, I'm panning them hard left and right, so his vocal in the chorus sounds big and all over the place. But again, these might change. I may want them somewhere else as the mix progresses. I may want to automate the pan so that maybe the guitar isn't in the left or the right for the entire song. Maybe it moves. That's perfectly fine. You're going to find that that's what you're going to have to do to make the mix interesting, and that's going to come in a later video. But for now, this is a great starting point. So we've picked the most important part of our song, we've got a rough volume balance, and we've got a rough panning balance. So the mix is kind of coming together. The last major thing that we need to do is we're setting up our initial mix is get a master fader in here. Look at our volume levels and make sure we have good gain staging going to that master fader, and then take a look at something else on the master fader. So what we want to do is you can open up a master fader. Here in Pro Tools, I'm going to use an aux track as opposed to a master fader. I did a video on this on YouTube. If you're a Pro Tools user, you can go see why I'm doing that. Mostly it's the way that master faders work in Pro Tools and the way plugins work on that master fader. There's nothing wrong with using a master fader. I'm going to use one eventually. But for now, I'm going to call this, my submix or master. And what you want is a master fader, a stereo track to be sent to your speakers, right? 1 and 2. And what I'm going to do is then give this an input. And I'm going to give it an available input 1314. And I'm just calling this input submix. Submiz, can't even spell. And I'm just going to take every single one of my tracks, and instead of routing them to my speakers, I'm going to route them to submix. So all these tracks are going to be funneled through this green track. In most DAWs, if you just open up a master fader set to your same output, it'll do the same trick. But for now, this is going to be our master fader. So if I press play,
This death I tremble.
and if I mute that master fader, you don't hear anything. All right? Does it make sense? Everything's dumped into here. Now, what we're looking at here is the level, okay? The volume of everything that's being sent to this submix. You can see it's pretty darn hot, and you can even see that I clipped. I'm clipping all over the place. This is important. You don't want that, okay? Clipping is bad in most any situation, but it's very bad in a digital recording environment like Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, whatever software you're using. This is because the way audio is handled in a DAW is completely mathematical. You either are clipping or you're not, okay? The computer is just ones and zeros. So by the time the volume hits just past 0 dB on your fader or whatever it is, when it clips, then it immediately turns to distortion. There's no give, there's no play. The idea that we're usually not afraid of getting hot levels, or even the encouragement to record and mix as hot as you can without clipping, really comes from the analog world, with an analog console recording to tape, because there was way more headroom in some cases, some more give, some more play. Plus, if you really push the console or the tape, that's actually where things started to sound really sweet. It would start to distort or saturate just a little bit, and a lot of that color that happened just naturally from pushing hot levels through a board really sounds cool, okay? It does not sound cool in your DAW, trust me. So the idea is, in a DAW, not only does it not sound cool, but you have no need to push your levels really hot because you don't have a noise floor that you're dealing with. What do I mean by that? I mean, in the analog days, and even today, consoles and tape, they contribute noise to your signal. And not much noise, and some things more than other, but it's analog circuitry, it's electricity, and eventually running your tracks through all these components can add noise and hiss. And the louder you can get your level above that hiss, the less you'll notice the hiss, right? Well, we don't have that problem in a DAW. You pick up a $100 audio interface and a small piece of software, even GarageBand, something for free, you're going to have a very clean, low noise recording environment. It's fantastic going into your DAW. So you don't need to worry about low level hiss, okay? So my point is, let's do conservative levels. Let's create a group out of everything. in Pro Tools, there's already a group called All. So it'll group all tracks. That way I can turn down all these faders while keeping their relative balance to each other, because I like that balance. I'm just going to turn those all down a bit. And then I can simply get rid of this group and turn up the master fader because that was affected by the all group. And let's see if we've got anything better.
In this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every star. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find
Right, so that biggest peak was just about -3, but it was averaging around -7, -8. That's much better to me. I'd rather have a conservative level go into my master fader or my submix than anything crazy like that, okay? So that's really, really important. Get conservative levels before you start adding any plugins, because these things will boot. You're going to get some compression happening, and that's going to boost your levels a little bit, and you just don't want to have to cram things into your digital mix bus, because here's the idea. All these tracks have to get funneled through one pair of outputs. So don't try to squeeze so much through a small pair of outputs, right? I know it's a metaphor, but let's make it easier on your computer. You'll get a better sounding mix, trust me. Once you've got proper gain staging, the final thing I do before I really get into mixing is I use some mix bus compression, okay? This is controversial in some senses because some people completely disagree, so you're going to have to experiment. But what do I mean? I mean I'm going to take a compressor and put it on the master fader, all right? In this video, I'm going to try to use as many of just the stock plugins that come with Pro Tools, so you can see that I'm not just using specific plugins. I like the plugins that come with my DAW, and any DAW that you get out there, they're shipping with some great plugins. So if you see me using any of these plugins, these are the ones that come free with Pro Tools, and I recommend you experiment with the ones that you already have because A, they sound great, and B, you already have paid for them. All right, what a concept. So here is the typical compressor. And what's the point of mix bus compression? The point is simply this. The proper gain staging I was talking about, I want to make sure that I'm just touching, just capping some of those peaks just a little bit. If you remember, one of my tom hits, it spiked the audio to around -2. I want to just tame some of those peaks just a little bit so it lightly just squeezes the dynamic range, the space that my mix is operating in, just a hair. This isn't limiting. This isn't going to be heavy compression. This is barely going to be doing anything. And then it's not going to be doing much reduction. If it does affect a peak, it's just going to turn it down just a hair. It makes a big, big difference in just squeezing your tracks a little bit closer together. Some people consider this glue. And the reason I'm putting it on first before I make any mixing decisions is because if I mix my track and then put it on later, it could make my mix fall apart because I've made very specific mix decisions, and then you add a compressor at the end and it's not going to jive well. You're going to have to make it somehow fit. The point of the mix bus compressor in my mind is to mix through it, is that it squeezes your tracks together just a hair, and then you mix based off of what you're hearing through the compressor. It keeps things together, gives a little bit of punch. I'm not even going to use this to make my track louder, okay? I'm going to turn down the peaks and then try to just get it back to the same level that it was, okay? What I'm going to do is start with a really low ratio, okay? Right now it's 3:1, and that's just too high for a mix bus compressor in my mind. I don't want it to compress that much. So I'm going to adjust the ratio and adjust the threshold so it's only getting some of the peaks.
in this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every star. And in this
All right, so with a threshold at 0, it's no compression's happening, right? Because the volume only comes up here. You have to tell the compressor at what volume do you want it to kick on. So the compressor is on, but it's not actually compressing anything. So I'm going to slowly turn it down until I see maybe -1 to -2 dB of reduction.
In this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every star. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that
So it's not much compression, just a little bit, -1, -2 dB of gain reduction, and because it's a really low ratio, and it's only really catching some of those peaks, and I haven't turned up any extra gain. So if anything, it's made my overall mix just a hair quieter. Otherwise, if you start cranking the compressor or if you pick a preset that really just gives it more gain, it'll make your mix sound louder and you'll think that it sounds better because our ears go, oh, it's louder. That's better. It's doing something. You don't want to fool yourself. You just want to squeeze it just a hair, tame some of those peaks. That's all we're doing. You've got your mix set up and ready to actually get started. You've got all your tracks, you've listened to the song, you've identified the most important place to start mixing. You've got a rough volume balance so you're kind of hearing everything. You've got a rough pan balance so you can take advantage of the stereo spectrum. And then you've got the proper gain dumping to your master fader so it's nice and conservative. And you've got a little bit of compression happening just so you can tame the peaks. You are ready to start zeroing in, which we're going to do in the next video. So stay with us. It's going to get exciting. Well, welcome to video 2 in the Rethink Mixing series. In the first video, we looked at a mixing philosophy and we kind of set up our session with initial volume balance among the tracks, initial panning, initial gain staging so we have the right levels, not too hot going to the master fader, and a little bit of mix bus compression. If you skip that video, please do yourself a favor, go back and watch that one first. I do things in an order for a reason. You'll really miss out if you skip around. So I kind of want you to go through the entire process, video by video, at least the first time, and then you can come back and reference anything you like in the future. So here we are with our same mix. Nothing's been done to it. Again, I'm mixing the entire song in front of you, okay? So I'm not doing anything offline. I'm not jumping ahead and getting some things done in between videos. I'm just picking up right where we left off. So you see everything that I would do to take these raw tracks that were recorded in a guy's basement and turn them into a polished mix, okay? So we got the same tracks, and I've got the same final chorus looped, the big kind of part of the song. We're working on that same section of the song because that's where all the instruments are in. That's kind of the big center of the song where everything needs to be locking in place. Now what I want to do and what I like to do is zero in on the most important instrument or instruments in a song and kind of work out from there. Just like we kind of started with the most important section of the song, you know, the busiest, most complex sonically, it's really helpful to me. And once I kind of learned how people do this and sort of applied it myself, it's really helpful to me to start with the most important instrument sonically to the mix. Now, this is an important distinction because I would say that the most important instrument in any mix is the vocal, assuming there is a vocal part. Because the vocal carries the lyric, which gives the meaning behind the song. It's the lyrics that people remember, and the vocal carries the melody. And the melody is usually the hook and the part that people remember in a song. So I agree that the vocal is the most important musically to most mixes, but the vocal is a very easy instrument to fit amongst many, many other instruments. So sonically, it's not as complex as, let's say, a drum set or a wall of guitars or what have you. So what we need to do is take a look at what is maybe the most important instrument or set of instruments in this mix and kind of work out from there. Again, there's no rules here, but this is just a helpful way to work because what I want to do is focus in on one instrument at a time. So you can hear one instrument at a time, make sure it's carved out nicely and sitting nicely by itself, and then start to bring in every other instrument and make sure that they all play well with the previous one. So by the time we're adding, you know, the last little track that has least amount of sonic significance, it can just fit in nicely with everything else. In this song, it's very piano driven, okay? So we're probably going to start with a piano and some of the rhythmic electric guitars that I talked about in the first video that I think, again, drums, piano, and that electric guitar riff, in my mind, are the really cool parts of this song. But before we jump into any of that, I gotta show you a trick that I promise is gonna help you with your mixes. And it's as simple as mixing in mono, okay? Now, I may have addressed this on the blog before, and you may have heard this in other places before, but I know I heard about mixing in mono for a long time before I actually did it in my mixes. And let me just say that this is one of the easiest and simplest things you can do to get immediate results in your mix. If you want a mix that is balanced well, that will hold up on lots of different sound systems, that will sound good coming out of one speaker, two speakers, in a car, in an elevator, on your iPod, in your headphones, mix in mono. There's two main reasons for this. One, mono is worst case scenario, okay? Obviously, stereo sounds way better than mono. It's bigger, you have more separation, it sounds more epic. Mono just sounds, well, mono, especially since we're used to stereo. But if you can get a mix that's kicking in mono, dude, you pop it out to stereo, it's that much better. It's easy. You might as well mix for worst case as opposed to mixing only in stereo, only to find out towards the end of your mixing process that you sum it to mono or you listen to it on a mono speaker and your mix falls apart. Sure, you can say, well, most people don't listen to mono, but again, if you watch the first video, you know that actually it's the opposite is true. Most people are hearing mixes in essence in mono because they're not sitting perfectly in between two speakers. They're hearing the sound hit their ear at the same time, or if they are listening in headphones, they're on the treadmill, working out, riding their bike down the street. It's not a quiet, focused listening environment. You want your tracks to sound good in mono. Worst case scenario, and two, mono will help you find phase issues. These are always a problem in any kind of recording scenario where you have a couple of mics recording one instrument, a stereo miking of acoustic guitar, drum overheads, you name it. This is a problem in pro studios, just the same as in project studios, but this is always a problem in home studios because no one pays attention to phase because it doesn't sound interesting and it sounds complex. It's not that complex. All you have to know is that when these tracks, they may sound cool in stereo, if it's summed to mono, you can have a whole track fall apart and lose the oomph. So by mixing in mono, you'll notice those problems if they exist and we can address them. There's no point pretending like they're not there. If we can find the problems and fix them, your mix will sound fuller and better. So, before we jump into the most important instrument, you need to flip your mix into mono. If you have an audio interface with a mono button on the front, hit it. If you have an audio interface with, let's say, a software component, like a software mixer, like in my case, I've got the mix control here, there's a mono button here. You could flip that. In Pro Tools, there is a way that I can show you so you can visibly see when I'm in mono or not. There's a plugin that simply takes your stereo field and drops it to mono. Okay? It's called stereo width, and you can take the width from 100% to 0.
In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match forever.
All right, so it's in mono. And now if I bypass, it'll go back to stereo.
In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match.
Okay, so if you have a stereo width plugin, some master fader plugins might have something where you can pull the width to 0. You can always take the panning and drop it up the middle. But again, a lot of audio interfaces or mixers will have a mono button, or even better, if you have some sort of monitor control box. Okay, so like a Samson C control or a Mackie Big Knob or a Persona Central Station. Any of those are examples of monitor management boxes where you run the output of your audio interface into that, and you can send that to multiple speaker sets and different things like that. A lot of those boxes have a mono button, so you can physically reach up and press that button, and it'll just sum your mix to mono. That is a great way to work. I'm just showing you in a plugin format so you can see it on the screen really quickly. I'm in mono, and when I click that to bypass, I'll be back to stereo. Okay? You obviously don't want to leave that on when you're done with the mix, but this will be helpful to show you. So I am going to do most of my mixing in mono. It's painful, I know, because your mix doesn't sound full and you want it to sound full. But trust me, it's worth it because who cares how the mixing process goes? What you should care about is how great your mix sounds at the end, right? So whatever you can do to make it sound good, you want to do. Trust me, mix in mono. We're going to work on our EQ balances and our compression and our volume balances, adjusting those if need be, all in mono, so that we're forced to use EQ and compression and volume to get the tracks to sound right, not pan. Okay, the panning will make it just that much easier. Now that we're in mono, let's start with the piano. I'm going to solo safe my master fader here so that if I solo the piano track, it will always come through here, and we're going to take a listen. Okay, it sounds fine. This is a piano heavy track, so I want the piano to still sound full and big because it's a piano dominated song, especially at the beginning. But here's a little trick too. If you've watched these videos or hung out at the Recording Revolution for any length of time, you know what I'm about to say. You want to put a high pass filter on this track. Okay, a high pass filter is a simple EQ curve, and all it allows you to do is carve out a lot of the low end. Okay, so in this EQ, I have 7 bands of EQ, and one of those 7 bands is a high pass. It's the same thing as a low cut. It just carves out the low end, and the more you pull it up, the higher the frequency it goes, the thinner your track will be. Right? So it just thins out all the low end. Now, why is this helpful? This is helpful because all of these tracks, here's the big idea, need to be sculpted away. A track can sound full and sound good by itself. You want to get the best sounding piano, the best sounding acoustic guitar, the best sounding kick drum. But when it comes time to mix, you can't let these tracks just sit the way they are, taking up the whole frequency spectrum, because you're going to have to cut out space in each track to make room for something else. A bass guitar is going to take up a lot of low end. A kick drum should take up a lot of low end. Why not take your other tracks, like piano and guitars and vocals, and free up some of their low end to then be used for the bass and kick drum? By getting rid of some of the low end in a lot of these instruments, all of a sudden your bass and kick drum are going to sound fuller. They're going to sound better. They're going to sound bigger because there's nothing masking them. Okay, masking is a big problem. Things covering each other up. So by carving away some of the low end, we're going to reveal a lot of the low end in like kick and bass guitar. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So what you won't notice right now is how this affects the rest of the mix, but as soon as we bring in the drums, it's all going to make a big difference. It's the subtle things that matter. So what I do is I press play, I bring the high pass filter up to the point that it starts to sound thin to me, to the point where I start to really notice that I'm cutting out the low end, and then I dial it back a bit. You shouldn't really hear much of the low end being cut out necessarily, and we can always adjust it more as we need to. So you've cut out almost 150 hertz on this piano, and you almost don't notice much being rolled off, but that is a lot to roll off. I'm going to keep it there for now, and I'm just going to take a listen again. Beautiful. So what have I done? Nothing. I've basically just cut out low end that you probably don't hear, that may not even be in the piano track, but that's a great starting point. The piano sounds fine. If it were by itself, it would sound fine. Here's what we need to do. We need to start bringing in some of the guitars and see how they play EQ-wise against the piano. Let's get these electrics. Okay, so I'm just checking, listening to my balance again. The balance sounds good. I can hear it for the most part. Let's go ahead and grab an EQ on this guitar as well. Get the same 7 band. And this is the electric, the higher up octave, I think. Yep, and I'm going to put a high pass filter on this as well. Notice how much I can cut out. 278. Copy this over to the octave down guitar. I just turned up the lower octave guitar a little bit. So at this point, we've rolled off a lot of low end. Let's take a listen to the acoustic. I'm going to copy the high pass. You can hear the low end being cut out of that. But even with all that low end cut out, it still cuts through rhythmically, right? Because that's what the acoustic guitar needs to do to make this piano part work. It's the mids that you're hearing, the strumming, the percussive nature. I don't need all that low end gunk. So now what's happening is I've got these two electric guitars and this acoustic guitar. I've got a lot of the low end cut out, which is great. But the problem I'm finding is I'm starting to mask the piano, okay? The piano, which sounded great by itself, it's just being masked just a little bit by the other frequencies of the guitars. So what I want to do is try to find a frequency or two in these electric guitars, maybe in the acoustic guitar, that I can notch out a little bit that might free up what I need to hear in the piano. So here's your first tip. EQ is one of the most helpful tools for sculpting a sound. Yes, you can boost as well as cut in an EQ, and you're going to do a little bit of both, but this will suit you well. If you think of an EQ as mostly a cutting or sculpting tool rather than a boosting tool, you will make better mixes. Okay, now, I'm not saying you don't ever boost, and I'm not saying that it's wrong to boost. There are no rules. If it sounds good, it is good, but let me give you two things to think about. One, if and when you can take away noise or take away a sound as opposed to introducing noise or increasing the sound of something, that will help your mix have more headroom, more clarity, sound better. Okay? So in this case, if we can take away some frequencies that are masking the piano and the other instruments versus boosting frequencies in the piano to make it pop out, it may be a little bit extra work and you may have to think backwards. But now what we're doing is just removing noise to get the same effect as opposed to increasing the volume of a certain frequency in the piano that, yeah, it may work, but we're just adding volume or noise. So it's going to take up headroom in our master fader. It's going to affect our compressor. And really, the more you boost, especially on a digital EQ or a plug-in in your DAW, you know, a lot of boosting in these EQs adds a lot of potential harshness, and it can just add a little something that sounds amateur. A lot of great analog EQs sound a bit more musical, I think, when you boost rather than some of these digital ones. So again, it depends on the equipment you have, but when in doubt, either way, it's always smarter to cut. It makes you think a little harder, but trust me, if you think of it as you've got these great sounds and now all you need to do, like a statue, is just chip away a little bit to reveal the final artwork. That's way better than taking a block and trying to add more blocks to it to create the art. So I'm going to experiment and see what I can find in these guitars. All right? Okay? This is very, very subtle at this point, but all I've done is taken on the high electric guitar, I cut about 3 dB at around 500 hertz. Okay? And the Q here, and if you've watched my EQ video, the Jumpstart to EQ, then you know a little bit more about what Q is. But if you just think of it as is it a real tight notch or is it a real general curve out? The more subtle and wide and general your boosts and cuts can be, the more natural they can sound. So I err on just a nice general scoop. And if it's scooping too many of the frequencies next to it, you can tighten up the Q, not a problem. But again, it's not about numbers, it's about what sounds right. I don't know. I have to experiment. I have to boost some frequencies and move them around to find what's happening at this frequency, what's happening at this frequency. It just depends on the tone of the guitar, the way it was mic'd, and what I can find are frequencies that maybe seem to really mask the piano when I boost them. And then I come back to where they were at 0, and then I cut out maybe 3 dB as a starting point. I'm not cutting out a ton, I'm cutting out enough to maybe make a difference as a cumulative effect. How do we know if it is it working? Well, what you want to listen to is I've got 4 instruments playing at once here, okay? You almost have to think of it as, and I got this from Kevin Ward at Mix Coach. I love the way this guy thinks. He said when he's listening to a mix like this and he's trying to get the right balance between guitars and piano and things like that, is if the mom of each of these guitar players were sitting in the studio with you, electric guitar player 1 has his mom there, the second guitar player has his mom there, the piano player's mom is there, and the acoustic guitar player's mom is there, will each mom be able to listen to your mix right now and hear their son or daughter playing? Go, oh yeah, that's their part, okay? What does that mean? That means you're sitting and thinking about, okay, now I'm biased to the acoustic. Is it there? Do I hear the acoustic? Do I hear the electric? Can I just hear my son's part? Is all the parts there and available for me to hear? It's a helpful way to think about it. Thanks, Kevin, for that little tidbit. So that's what I'm listening for. I'm going to press play again. And what I want you to do is listen to see, do you hear the acoustic? Do you hear the electrics? But do you also hear the piano? Because that's really important. And what I'll do now is bypass our EQ. Do you hear how when we bypass those EQs, it just becomes a muddy mess? It's because of all the low end that we don't need, and because some of those competing frequencies, and there's just a little bit of EQ cutting. We haven't boosted anything. We haven't tried to make anything pop out. We've just gotten rid of a little bit there, a little bit there, just a high pass there, and a little bit there. And it's making a big difference. Seems like a good starting point. Let's start with this. Now, here's something we need to consider. The compression idea, okay? The EQ, if you think of EQ as a tool to sort of fix your sounds, to remove masking and allow everything to be visible, right? I kind of think of EQ as fix the sound a little bit, not by boosting it and turning it to something it's not, but just removing what you don't need, revealing the inner beauty of each track, as it were, not by themselves. Again, notice that we didn't EQ something in solo, like, oh, make sure electric guitar 2 sounds great with EQ, and now let's listen to the piano, make sure that sounds great. No, I started with the piano, then introduced the other guitars, and I tried to EQ them as I'm listening to the piano. That's all that matters. Don't spend a whole lot of time in solo mode on just one instrument, right? That's going to cause some problems because the instrument may sound great soloed but poor in the mix. Just like a great mix, you might go, oh, I love that snare they got. But that snare, if you soloed it, may sound pretty honky. But for some reason, with all the other frequencies in the mix, it sounds really fat all of a sudden. It's all an illusion. Mixing is all an illusion. Okay, that's what we started with these instruments. Now I want to bring in a little bit of compression, because what compression will do is allow each performance to maybe stay at a more visible level, right? These players, may have hit one string a little harder than another. The piano might be a little heavier sometimes. That's called dynamics, and that's natural in music. I don't want to take that away, but what I want to do is reduce that range a little bit so I can keep its volume a little bit more up front, a little bit more in your face, because these are very percussive instruments and they're really core to the musicality of the song, and this will help the tracks really pop out and have a mix that's really ready to get in your face in a musical way. So a compressor is really helpful for that. Again, let's start with the piano. Grab the same Dynamics 3, Compressor 3 from Pro Tools. And here's a great idea. Start with a preset. With compressors, I think it's a great idea to start with a preset, only because what it'll do is show you some suggestions of ratio, attack, and release that a professional thought might be helpful. Let's see if there is a piano. No, there's not a piano setting. There's a little bit of gentle limiting. So I'm going to do that. See what we get here. Okay, this is really cool. Now, what this preset has is a really super high ratio, 100 to 1. That's why they call it limiting, because a limiter is really a compressor with a ratio of at least 100 to 1, typically. That means anytime audio crosses the threshold, it's really slammed down. Now, I don't really want to limit the piano as much as I want to compress it. But what it's doing is I've only set the threshold so just a little bit of the peaks are actually getting compressed. This means, and you can look up here, most of the piano sound is not getting compressed at all. Just these peaks. Right? But what is hitting that threshold is getting squashed enough that it's keeping basically the waveform a lot more consistent so that I can bump up the volume a couple of dB, and what it makes is a piano sound that's a little bit more pop. It's a little bit more right in your face. It's a little bit more what radio-ready pianos sound like. You can hear them at every element. They don't get lost when the piano player just lightly touches a few keys. It keeps the rhythm in place. Notice as I bypass the piano compressor a little bit, what happens. Now what I might do is turn down the piano just a little bit, the makeup gain. So turn it down a dB. Very nice. All of that's done is just get the piano a little bit more present, level-wise, volume-wise, a little more consistent. Let's go to the acoustic guitar because that's another very rhythmic track that I'm not getting a lot of musical tone from. Like the notes aren't as much important as it is the driving rhythm behind all these core instruments. So we'll do another compressor. I'm just going to grab the same compressor here and I'll look for an acoustic preset. right? So it just gives it just a touch of presence. It brings it up just a little bit. Look at this, really low ratio, 1.6 to 1, okay? And again, a medium attack and release. So what this means, attack, the faster the attack, that means that quicker the compressor slams down on whatever crosses the threshold. What does that mean sonically? It means if you have a very fast attack, your peaks won't get through very much. It will really kind of compress the audio. It won't have as much of a strum. If there's a big strum, it won't sound very big. Whereas if you have a really slow attack, the strum will get all the way through, but then the sustain of the chord will get compressed. The release is the opposite. If you have a really fast release, the moment he strums, it compresses, it releases the compression, so it's ready to compress again. It's like ready to pounce again quickly. Whereas a slow release, it compresses and then it slowly brings it back to the original volume. These presets are a great way to start to see what attack and release they set and what ratio. Those three things are pretty much the only helpful pieces of information the preset will give you. The threshold is irrelevant in a preset. I always tell you that because they have no idea how loud your track is. You know, I may have recorded a really quiet acoustic guitar or a really loud acoustic guitar. So you want to adjust the threshold, dial it down until you're seeing the gain reduction you want. Now, I'm not trying to really overly compress these things. I just want to just touch the peaks a little bit so that I can bring it all up about a dB so that the acoustic guitars is, again, like the piano, a little more rhythmic, a little more in your face. Let's take a listen to all of that together. Okay, real subtle, it's really helping. Now, I'm actually probably going to compress these two lead guitar parts just a little bit. I don't typically compress electric guitar much because a distorted, let's say, electric guitar, even a mildly overdriven guitar, has natural compression. It's just kind of happening in the amplifier and in the microphone you use. And so usually it's got a nice upfront sound. But sometimes if there's a lead riff where they're moving around, a little bit of compression can help that lead riff stay again out front. So you don't lose a couple of notes. You'll notice really good mixes if there's a lead guitar riff, you feel and hear every note. And we take that for granted. We just assume that's just the way it was played. And it was played that way, but it's compression in the background that is helping every note be audible so that you don't miss like oh, what did he drop down to there? Like you could hear every note pretty easily. So I'm going to do a little bit of a compression here. I'm going to literally copy the acoustic guitar compressor over to these electric guitars and see if that is helpful. Let's see here. All right, so you notice when I copied the same, well, I started with a preset called Fatten, and it had way too high of a ratio. So I dialed it back. I just, whatever, started with it. Who knows what it sounded like? And I dialed it back. When I had something that was kind of working for this electric guitar, meaning it was slamming down a little bit on some of the peaks so I could boost everything up a little bit, I copied it over to the octave guitar part that's playing the same part, but it was a little quieter, so the threshold wasn't low enough. It actually wasn't compressing, so I had to dial the threshold back a bit. Now that we're doing a little bit more mixing on these parts, I'm starting to feel like I'm losing the the octave guitar down, right? You hear the octave up because it's a real bright, mid-rangey guitar part. But let's take a listen to all four of these parts together, and I'm gonna mute the low guitar and see if it really disappears, and if I bring it back, if it fills it out nicely, just to make sure that I'm not losing my mind. Because it sounds like it's too quiet or it's not EQ'd right, but it could just be that I'm getting used to it. All right, so when you took it away, I could tell it was gone, but I decided just to turn the high electric down a little bit and turn up the low electric just a smidge. It could be an EQ thing, but that might be better. All in all, let's take a listen to it in mono one more time, and we'll bypass the EQ and we'll bypass the compression. You hear all that? It's a big difference, but all we did was some little tweaks, but it adds up big. Now, you feel like you lose some of the fullness, some of the bottom end. I think it's muddy at the bottom end, but you definitely feel like it all thins out a little bit, and that's because of the high pass filters. But they're clearer, they're more present, they're a little bit more engaging because the compression is keeping them just poking out just a little bit more. And we know we've got a nice balance between the piano and all three guitars, and all in mono. Okay, so it's sounding balanced in mono. So now what we need to do is just take a listen to it in stereo. Okay, very cool. Very, very cool. It just gives you a reminder that it is going to be wider, it is going to be cooler than it is in mono. But again, mono forces us to make the balanced decisions based off of the right EQ and based off of the right compression without any false separation from panning. They're right on top of each other. All four of those parts are being played right on top of each other, so you're forced to get the EQ and compression right so that all four parts stick out nicely. That means that they're EQ'd right, their balance is right, because when people are listening to them outside of a stereo environment, again, like across the room, in the car, where they're not perfectly in the center, every part's going to be popping out just nicely because it works in mono. You're not getting a balanced mix only because of the panning. That's kind of like a handicap, all right? We want to think of panning as the icing on the cake, the easy way to finally get extra separation at the end, okay? Now that we've got a good balance with our core instruments, in this case, I wanted to start with piano, start with guitars. We're really getting a nice little mix together. Now, there's a lot of more instruments to come, but what we're going to do is bring them in and try to make them work alongside what we've already done. You've already learned about how powerful a high pass filter is and how powerful just a touch of compression can be to get things poking out. And trust me, these little decisions are going to go a long way to building up a nice polished mix. So in the next video, we will look at bringing in our drums and our bass to try to fill out the band here. Well, hey, we're at video 3 of the Rethink Mixing series. Hope you are enjoying it so far. Hope you're seeing some really foundational mixing concepts and seeing how the smallest of moves can make the biggest of difference. And as we keep adding instruments to this mix and making sure they balance with our initial piano, guitars, hopefully you'll see how we have to continue to sculpt things and make things fit together. I mean, that's what mixing is, right? You're trying to get great sounding tracks, like great tasting ingredients by themselves, but allow them to be mixed together so that what you hear at the end sounds great. So the meal at the end tastes great, right? You can have all the greatest spices and meats and vegetables and fruits in the world, but if you mix them all together at the wrong proportion or have too much of one thing versus the other thing, what you get in the final dish can be disgusting. And you'll be like, well, why does this taste gross? This is made up of really expensive organic foods that taste delicious. And the problem will be, well, you didn't cook it well. You didn't blend those foods together well. You didn't mix them well. You put too much of one thing in versus the other. That's the thing. It doesn't matter how great your tracks are, even how well they were recorded, if you don't blend them appropriately. What we want is a great final mix. So in this video, we've already gotten our initial balance, right? We've already gotten initial panning and initial mix bus compression and the right gain staging. And then we jumped into starting with what I think are the most important elements of this song, the piano and percussive guitar. It's kind of the musical section. And we just use some EQ to carve out some of the low end and some of the competing frequencies, and then a little bit of compression to keep those piano and guitar parts up front and sort of just constantly rhythmic and not disappearing on a note by note basis. Now it is time to bring in the drums and bass. Okay, so this is the fun part. Drums are a lot of fun. A lot of times mixes start with drums. It's a great way to start drums. In this mix, we're going to bring them in after the guitars and piano. So remember, we're in mono. Okay, if you missed the second video, then you missed a key reason as to how you can mix effectively quicker, and that's by mixing in mono. And I mean, you start to make your mix happen in mono from the very beginning, and you make your EQ and compression and volume level decisions based on how they sound in mono. All right, worst case scenario, we want things to jive in mono. This is no more apparent than when it comes to multi-track drums, because you have an opportunity to have a mess on your hands, because we have microphones overhead that could be out of phase with each other, out of phase with the kick drum, out of phase with the snare, and you won't know unless you listen to it in mono. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is actually listen to the drums by themselves for a second, just to make sure they are in phase. I'm going to show you a really helpful trick. Okay, I'm going to unsolo these guitar parts, and what we have is a kick drum, a snare drum. Okay, so these mics are close on the kick, close on the snare. I have two tom mics. These are close mics. And then I have a stereo pair of overheads, right, capturing the whole nuance of the kit. And then I have a mono room mic. Okay, the room mic honestly was an afterthought, and it wasn't the best mic choice because I was limited to how many mics I had on me at the time, and we didn't have a whole lot of time, so it may or may not sound good. If it doesn't sound good, we'll take it out. But what I want to do first is make sure these tracks are in phase. Let's start by listening to the overheads. Now remember, we're in mono, okay? Got the width at 0%, so I'm in mono. Here are the overheads summed to mono. All right. What I want to do is bring in the kick drum. And what I want to do is see if the kick drum sounds best compared to the overheads the way it is, or does it sound better if I invert the phase or invert the polarity? And what does that mean? It means that if you take a look, okay, this kick drum, it starts out by dipping down. Do you see that? Let me just make this track a little bit bigger. The waveform, waveforms go down and up, down and up. It starts by dipping down and then goes up. Well, inverting the polarity would be the opposite of this. You would flip it, it would still sound the same by itself, but then the waveform goes up first and then down. In solo mode, that won't make any difference by itself. What makes a difference is which sounds better when compared to the overheads, okay? Because just the way multiple pieces of audio hitting multiple different mics at multiple different times, you could have phase issues. So without getting too much in depth in it, because what matters is what it sounds like, let me just show you a helpful tip just to make sure that your close mics sound the best with the overheads. I'm going to pull up an EQ, probably because I'm going to use an EQ to begin with. Plus, a lot of EQ plugins have this polarity flip switch, phase reverse. It looks like a 0 with a diagonal line through it, okay? A lot of preamps have this on the preamp, so you can take care of phase issues on the way to the recording. But let's say you didn't notice it when you were recording, or let's say you didn't record this track, so it was given to you this way. This is a simple way to flip it on and off. So I haven't changed anything yet. I'm going to press play, and you're going to listen to the kick drum mic and the overheads in mono, and then I'm going to toggle the phase reverse on and off and see what makes the kick drum sound better. So I think it sounds fuller and fatter the way it was. Leave it untouched. Beautiful. Let's move on to the snare drum. I'm going to copy the same EQ over. Again, I haven't done any EQing, but I'm just using it for the phase reverse for now. And let's listen to that with the overheads. So do you hear how the snare gets thinner when I reverse the phase? Again, that means that this means I may have mic'd it well. I don't even need to change the phase on the snare. Things are going well so far. Let's listen to the toms. So what I want to do is find an area where the toms are actually hit. And to be honest, they're not hit very often. So what I might find is the end of chorus. I think it's the toms here somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to loop this section. And I'm going to listen to just the high tom. All right, I'm going to copy the EQ over and see if I can flip the phase and see which sounds better. All right, it sounds better unflipped. Things are going well so far. Copy this over, take a listen to just the low tom. So now, do you hear when I flip the phase on the low tom or the floor tom, it actually sounds fatter and beefier? Listen to it normally, then flipped. Now this is completely a preference thing, but to me, when I flip the phase on the floor tom, it sounds way fatter in the overheads. So dude, I'm going to keep that flipped. And this is why you want to do this really quickly with all your individual close mics, one at a time, soloed with your overheads in mono. Because what I discovered is the kick, snare, and high tom are great with the overheads. They sound full, they sound fat, but the floor tom actually sounds way better when you flip the phase, and it instantly made the drum sound fatter and gave it more presence. I didn't have to do any boosting. I didn't have to do anything. It just literally flipped the polarity on it. So that is a helpful trick. Now I've got my drums sounding in phase with each other. What I want to do is get a nice rough balance among the drums by themselves really quickly again, including the room mic, see if that's any helpful, and then I'm going to bring them in with the other instruments and we'll start EQing and compressing. Let's go back to our original loop. And we'll start balancing. All right, so the room mic, yeah, it sounds bad. Let's take a listen to it by itself. Yeah, there may be something I can do with it later for an effect, but I knew it was going to sound kind of weak. It wasn't a good sounding room, and it was more of an afterthought. So when in doubt, just get rid of it. Room mic, gonna hide and make inactive. I don't need to see that or hear it. Okay, so now what I want to do is solo my piano, acoustic, and electric guitars. These were just the way they were. I haven't changed the balance, haven't changed the EQ or anything. And now I want to bring in the drums and get them balanced to these guitars and piano. And then we will take it from there. All right. So we got a balance kind of back to where it was, but making sure it fits underneath the piano, electric, and acoustic. Now what we need to do is actually start doing the same thing we did with the initial guitar and piano parts, which is sculpt using EQ and compress if necessary. I like to start with the overheads because in my mind, that's the way I treat drum recordings, that the overheads are the sound of the drum kit. Now, granted, this is in mono, so things sound a little bit weak, but I'm going to grab the same 7-band EQ. And in context with the rest of the instruments, I'm going to start EQing. I probably will do a little bit of a high pass to roll off any low-end rumble because I don't need that in the overheads. And maybe see if there's any mud that I can pull out. We'll take a listen. All right, real subtle. I just rolled off a high pass up to about 100. And then I kind of know that these overheads, let's listen to them soloed. Hear that? It just kind of cleans up some of the nastiness, tightens up a little bit. Instead of just boosting the cymbals right now, it really just kind of cleans out some of the mids, which make the cymbals a little bit more crisp. And the low end, we cut out some of that. So it makes just the drums and the overheads a little tighter, a little more crisp. And again, they're lacking because I have them kind of quiet in comparison to the close mic. So it's not as loud as I would have them if this was the only drum sound. But let's go back to the way it sounds in the mix because that's what matters. And start bringing in the low instruments. Now, with kick drum, what are we going to do with kick drum? The kick drum sounds pretty decent by itself, all right? You know, with the drums, it sounds fine. But my job is to, in context with a mix, with all the other instruments, make sure that it sounds tight, so not like a loose, like woof, 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 woof. Make sure it sounds tight, make sure it has the bottom that it's going to need, but then also make sure that it has the beater head, the attack that we can hear on really small speakers, on earbuds. You know, when it's just a real thin sound, it still's got the click, 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 because that's, you need to make sure that's in there as well. Now, a decently mic'd kick drum should have all of those elements, so we shouldn't need to necessarily find those and boost them. It may be a matter of cutting out what we don't need in the kick drum to, you know, then illuminate what is good about the kick drum because we cut out the other stuff, and then maybe with some compression, we'll bring those things out a little bit more. So let's start with the EQ. I don't know if you noticed, this one's really hard to hear and it's subtle depending on what speakers you're listening to, but I actually put a high pass filter on the kick drum, and you would think you wouldn't want to roll off the low end of the kick drum, but all I've rolled off is a steep curve at about 30 hertz. The human ear can't really hear below 20 hertz, and there's probably not much low end happening below 30, and if there is, by carving out just a little bit there, it actually kind of tightens up my kick drum sound so it's a little less loose and a little more apparent. Take a listen to it before and after. Real subtle, not crucial, but it might help out a little bit to tighten up that kick drum sound. Now I'm going to go, I want to make sure that I don't take out anything in this low range. Between 100 and 50 is probably where the bottom end of the kick drum is, right? That's where we're going to feel it. And then up here, I don't know, in the 5K range, somewhere up there is going to be the beater head. In the middle is likely going to be a lot of mud, or what typically happens is we get a cardboard sounding kick drum. So you're beating the kick drum, the mic is placed, and you hear a lot of like flap, 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 and it just sounds like you're hitting a piece of cardboard on a box or something. So I might poke around to see if I can find where that cardboardy sound is really existing by over accentuating it, and then pull it out to tighten up the bottom end and tighten up the high end without boosting anything, basically. was really hard to hear, but it's subtle. What I've taken out is a lot of sort of the mid-rangey, muddy stuff where a lot of other instruments are hanging out anyway. And what that'll do, again, is like I said, when I introduce compression, I'll be able to accentuate the low end and the high end a little bit more because I've gotten rid of some of the other stuff that would get in the way. Again, take a listen to it by itself with overheads. Before. I think we just have a little bit more of a focused sound. It's very subtle. We haven't like changed the kick drum sound, but again, hopefully the kick drum sounds halfway decent. You shouldn't have to change it. You just sort of sculpt what you don't need to accentuate what you do have. Let's move on to the snare drum. You hear that honkingness, the honkiness there? Sounds cheap, right? So what is that, 382 hertz? That might be something I want to cut out. Yeah, that really tightens up the snare. Take a listen to that so you can hear it just by itself. It just kind of takes out a little bit of the ring, a little bit of the honkiness. It's a good start for now. Subtle, but it should be good. Let's bring back in the band. Now let's find a place where the toms are featured a little bit more. Maybe go back to the end here. Again, with the toms, I'm just going to do a little bit of a roll off, maybe up to 40 on the high tom, and maybe up to 30 on the low tom. What I did is just cut out about 400 hertz. Just it's a little bit of the mid-range stuff that you don't need in that tom drum. Like it allowed me to keep the low end and again keep some of the beater on the tom. I might do the same here on the high tom. All right, so what we've done is just a little bit of real simple subtractive EQ on the drums, as well as checking the phase of the close mics with the overheads in mono. And let's take a listen to it in stereo and just see kind of how we're doing just with EQ. right? So it's subtle, but you could hear some of the woofiness come back in when we got rid of the EQ, and the drums sounded fine, but then when you bring the EQ back in, I think I would describe it as sounding a little bit more tight. And again, it's a place to start. Now, what drums really benefit from is compression. And you remember we used a little bit of compression to kind of kiss the peaks on our guitars and piano just to bring them up a little bit level wise. It's more of a balance issue. With drums, kick and snare especially, if you use compression well, you can really increase the sustain or the fatness of those two instruments in particular. That's where compression is really handy. So let's take a listen to some compression on the kick drum. I'm going to bring a compressor here, and what I'm going to do is just find maybe a preset, but find a good ratio and attack and release so that I'm actually seeing some consistent gain reduction on the kick drum. What that will do is allow me to tame the attack of the peaks, right? So you look at the kick drum wave, right? It has the initial attack where it's the loudest, and then it has the tail. The compressor is going to allow me to squash that a little bit so it's a little quieter, a little closer to the level of this tail, and it can bring up the overall level of the kick drum. So in essence, it'll bring the attack back to where it was, but it'll make the sustain a little louder. What that means, especially for the snare drum, is a fatter snare drum sound. All right, so we'll experiment with kick and then we'll experiment with snare. All right, really simple. I started with a preset. It gave me a 5-to-1 ratio, which is a good amount of medium compression, a slow attack, and a faster release. Now, what that did was allow the kick drum transients to still come through pretty much, and it was only kind of compressing the sustain a little bit. And what that allowed me to do is get a little bit more of a consistent kick drum sound. So when it's not compressed, sometimes you may lose the kick drum hit because he's a human. He can't hit it at the same velocity every single time. And we don't want to just replace him with a robot, but a little bit of compression like this can allow the kick drum hits to be more consistent, more studio ready, as it were. So it's always keeping that downbeat. So listen to it again with or without. Right? Real nice. Subtle, but it makes a big difference. Let's look at the snare. I'm going to copy the same compressor over, but I'm going to start with a snare comp, okay? What I want to do is actually compress the peaks a little bit more so that it's actually squashing the peak just a little bit, and that will allow me to bring up the overall level of the sustain of the snare drum. So this preset may not be what I want. It looks like it has a slow attack, but we'll take a listen. All right, let's take a listen to it with or without. See, it gives more crack and more fatness to the snare drum. Take a listen to it just with the drums. Take it off. Kind of pedestrian. Bring it back. You know, so I might turn up the ratio a little higher. So it actually compresses a little bit more, and then turn up the gain a little bit. And what matters though is it sounding fat with the band. So we'll take a listen again one more time. And we'll take off the compression of the kick and the snare. And, you know, and if they're making it a little too loud, you know, because we've got the gain on the compressor, you can turn the faders back down and just see if they sit comfortably with everything else. Yeah, real subtle, a little bit of compression on the kick and the snare give you a more consistent kick and snare hit every time, and sometimes a little bit more fatness on the snare, which is nice. Now, the only other thing we'd probably want to do is a little bit of compression on the toms, you know, so maybe we'll go back to the section. There's a little bit of the tom hit here, sort of just loop that. And what we can do is just kind of copy the same compressor on the kick drum to both toms and see if that works. Right, so you just set the threshold where it looks like I'm getting some gain reduction. Gives a little bit more punch, a little bit more attack. So far, things are sounding good. Now, let's take a listen to the drums with and without the EQ and compression. Let's go back to our main section here. We're kind of rocking. There we go. All right, before. Right, so it's a more punchy, a little more crisp. Here's something on the snare I'm actually hearing is a little bit of a ring. Boom. So there's some frequency there. So let me see if I can find it. I'm gonna have a really tight curve here, and I'm just gonna poke around until I find that ring. So maybe when I was looking for that ring initially here, it should be a little higher up. Yep, so I think I just needed to fine tune a little bit where that frequency was on the snare drum. Now, the only other thing we need to do right now with the drums that it's really going to be an issue in my mind is the toms. The toms don't get hit very often in this song, right? It's mostly kick and snare. And so there's a lot of drum bleed in the tom mics. Now, sometimes that doesn't sound bad. I mean, that's just the way the kit sounds, but it's also a lot of extra noise. Like, just listen to the toms, you know? All of that is in my drum mix, even though there's no tom playing there. So any processing I'm doing on the toms, is affecting the kick and the snare and the hi-hat a little bit. So what I would do is either use a gate to get rid of it, or honestly, guys, if the toms don't play, but every once in a while in a fill, it's much easier in a DAW to just mute or delete when there are no tom hits. So what I want to do is simply find where the tom hits are and just kind of mute everything else. Right, so what I'm going to do is simply kind of tab up and just put breaking points. I'm basically splitting the audio. And I could delete, but I'm just going to kind of select everything that's not a tom hit and mute it. In Pro Tools, you can Command M for mute. All right, and then here I'm going to just do a fade up. Delete this fade so there's no pops or clicks. And then all I want to do is a little bit of fade out so there's nothing abrupt. Let's find out where the next tom hit. I don't know if he hits any toms. Yeah, he doesn't hit any toms till the end here. Okay, so this is really where the toms start. Do a break here, select all of this, mute it, select all of this, mute it. Take a listen here. Now, I don't know if you hear there's a little pop here. You can almost see it. He may have hit the tom mic. I can simply get rid of that. What I might do is just select this, duplicate some crossfades, because it's not going to be perfect. All right. Fade those out. So you get the idea. I've basically gotten rid of any kind of bleed that's not in there. Now, that seems a little bit mechanical to you maybe, but what it does in my mind is get rid of a lot of ringing, and it just allows the sound to be a little tighter because there's not this kick and the snare bleed ringing in your overall drum sound. Yep, and the toms come in and go out perfectly. That is all I'm usually doing when it comes to normal drum mixing. There's going to be some stuff we look at in the next video that will enhance the drums a little bit more, but here's something you need to think about. If you feel like your kick, your snare, maybe your toms need a little bit something extra, okay? Meaning you've taken away some of the mud, some of the cardboard, and it sounds better with the EQ, but you still feel like something's missing. Instead of boosting an EQ frequency, boosting some high end to get something to crack a little bit more, something you may want to consider is some saturation or distortion. And here's what I mean. When you boost an EQ, like if I felt my snare drum just wasn't quite cracking the way I want, if I can boost it, sure, and that might help a little bit, but I'm only boosting what's there. If the snare drum doesn't have enough crack, I can't make it crack more by boosting something that never existed. Okay? Plus, again, we talked about this. The more you EQ boost, the more noise it can introduce. Now, distortion is noise, obviously, so maybe it sounds contradictory that I'm saying use some distortion, but this could be an opportunity to use a saturation plugin or a distortion plugin. Now, a lot of these come free with your DAW. Pro Tools has a free one that no one really uses, and I never used for a long time, and it can be really helpful. Let's take a listen here. I think I've got it, what is it, a harmonic? Even the lo-fi sound. This is an old Digidesign plugin. It has some settings, and there's one called tape saturation. And what it's going to do is add a little bit of grit. Let's go back and loop our section so we're at the right place. Downbeat to downbeat. Bypass. All right, see, that's adding a little bit more crack, but let's listen to it in context with the instruments, because again, that's what matters. I like the way it sounds. It doesn't add a frequency necessarily. It adds harmonics. It adds things that are intangible. It adds something that's not there. So if you feel like you need a little bit more crack, a slight amount of saturation or distortion on some kind of lo-fi plugin, harmonic plugin, even a guitar amp simulator, worst case scenario, you could dial up just the smallest amount of gain, and it would basically be like overdriving your snare drum just a hair. And what that does is it gives a very percussive sound. So if you feel like you need more of something to add to the sound, I would say try that route before you start boosting a bunch of EQ. But again, there's nothing wrong with boosting EQ. You're just going to add a little bit of the noise that's already there. And if the kick drum or snare drum is lacking, again, it's not much to add to it. Let's keep it with that for now, and let's bring in the bass guitar, finally, because it sounds so empty. Okay, this was just real simple. This was just a bass guitar plugged in direct to the audio interface, okay? So there's not going to be any kind of amp tone. There's nothing really super interesting about it. But there's a couple things I want to experiment with. I want to show you how EQ can help clean up your bass so it sounds the way you want it to sound in the mix, and then how compression can help your bass constantly be in your face in a good way, okay? Because bass guitar is very nuancy, and the way you pluck the strings, you're not always consistent, kind of like we looked at the kick and the snare. Now I'm going to do this in context with the rest of the instruments because that's what matters. So again, I'm going to solo everything instead, now just mute the vocals and the violin for now. So let's start with EQ, and we'll work our way through. All right, with bass, now what have we done? We have done a small high-pass filter like we did with the kick drum, only up to about 40 hertz, just getting rid of some of that low end. Then we got rid of some around 450. Just kind of that mid-rangey, cheap sound. It sounds cheap, right? Smooths it out. It allows you to feel the nice smooth low end. And his finger plucking is still there. The high end is still there. the bass sounds fatter and fuller as if we boosted something, but we haven't boosted anything. We've taken things away, okay? So again, very, very cool. Let's listen to it in context again. Now what I want to do is take a little bit of compression on the bass. Now the bass is one of those instruments that again is very dynamic, so a compressor is going to be your best friend here, live or in the studio, to squash down some of the peaks to make his performance a little more even. Okay, so that's what the compression will do, and then the makeup gain will allow you to then turn his bass line back up to the volume where you want to hear it, but it allows his quiet plucks to be just as present as his loud plucks. So I like to reduce a good amount of the dynamic range on a bass in a full production mix, just so it's like a more consistent, as if I was plucking out a nice synth part on a keyboard. It's going to be real consistent for the most part. So we can start with a preset and see where we go from there. Do you hear that? So what I've done is really even out the performance. It's allowed the bass, when I bypass the compressor, it kind of disappears. You know it's there. You can kind of hear it, but compression gives the bass that upfrontness that it needs so you feel it at all times. All right. Very, very simple. We've just gotten a little bit of EQ and a little bit of compression on the bass, and a little bit of EQ and a little bit of compression on the drums, a little bit of a saturation that I just tried on the snare drum. Now let's go ahead and bypass all the EQ and all the compression and see what it's done to our mix so far. Pretty awesome, huh? Let's pop it into stereo and like get a little bit of a payoff for all of our work in mono. You see it coming together, right? It makes a big difference, all the little things we're doing. Tightening up the sound with EQ, focusing our ears on the frequencies that matter in the things we've recorded, right? Again, we haven't done any boosting of any kind so far with EQ. Compressing things, some a little, some a lot. Some just to give a little more presence and energy to, some to fatten up entirely, some to give a lot more consistency to, some things haven't been compressed at all, like the overheads. Right? And then everything's running through just a little bit of the bus compressor. And again, this is something you want to check is see, now that we've done some compression, some EQ, how are my levels in the bus compressor? You'll notice that not much is hitting the bus compressor because I think we've gotten rid of a lot of the low end frequencies. We've cut out a lot of sound, so not much is running to the compressor. So I can adjust the threshold just a little bit to make sure I'm catching some of those peaks. We're making some progress, okay? We still don't have the vocals in, and we still don't have one other instrument, the violin, in the mix yet. But with all of these main instruments, the piano is still being heard, the guitars are being heard. And again, this is where you can make volume adjustments. Make sure that you bring your drums and your bass to support what you started with, which were the piano, the electric guitars, and the acoustics. So as we listen back, as we move forward throughout this series, we're going to make sure that, okay, is anything dominating or taking over my piano and my guitars? Because that's what we started with, and to me, that's the musicality of the song. We did a lot in this video, as simple as it is. Again, some more EQ and some more compression can go a long way. We phase checked the drums, did it all in mono. We're making some strides to getting a pretty decent mix here. So next video, we're going to take a look at using buses and group tracks and look at some global effects that can really enhance and improve our mix even just a little bit more. Well, welcome to video 4 of the Rethink Mixing series. You guys are moving right along, and hopefully you are learning this process of mixing and seeing us take these raw tracks that we started with and start to sculpt them into the polished tracks that we eventually want at the end of the day, right? So we are trying to enhance and sculpt and reveal what's already there, as opposed to adding things or changing things. Again, if you think of mixing as let's cut away and find a place for all of these tracks to funnel together through our master fader, then you probably have a better time mixing, as opposed to how can I change all my sounds to sound different. That's not really your goal of mixing unless you were just presented a bunch of tracks that are not usable, and then you have a crisis on your hand. And there's certain things you can maybe do to help, but what I'm trying to show you is how you can approach mixing in a real world setting. And again, you're looking over my shoulder. We're mixing this song from the ground up. We're not skipping anything. I haven't done anything in between these videos. We are picking up right where we left off. All we've done so far is some EQ and compression on the main instruments, like piano and guitars, and some EQ and compression on my drums. We even did some phase checking, right, to make sure that our close mics on the drums are locked in phase to my overheads. And I used a little bit of this, saturation plugin, this free plugin that came in with Pro Tools to add a little bit of grit to my snare drum, just to get it to cut through the mix just a hair. And at this point, that's all we've done. In this video, what we're going to look at is using buses for a couple of reasons. One, to group some tracks together to make some mixing decisions easier and give us, some global faders that we can use. Two, we're going to look at using buses to put on reverbs and delays and how they can help gel our mix together. So first thing we need to do is get some buses or some aux tracks in this session. Right now, all we have are the audio tracks and my master submix right here. What I like to do is create at least 3 main stereo auxes, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to select here and just create 3 stereo aux inputs. That's what Pro Tools calls them. Your DAW may call them buses, may call them, I'm not really sure, group tracks. It's an auxiliary track. It's a track that you can route things to. Just like if you imagine on a mixing console, you might have some group faders that you could group all the drums together. That way you can just, with one fader, group the drums up in volume or down in volume. That's what aux inputs can be used for. So I'm going to create 3 of them here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of my master fader here just to make things a little easier to see. And then these 3 green ones are going to be my group tracks. I'm going to call this one drums. I'm going to call the next one band. So in my mind, that's going to be all the guitars and pianos and things. And the third one is going to be called vocals. Okay. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type these in capital letters just to be picky, just so I see them as standing out a little bit differently. So, drums, band, Vox. There's nothing going through these tracks as it is right now. They're just placeholders right now. What I want to do is first make sure that their outputs are going to my master fader, which is submix. Actually, I've got two buses called submix. One's capital letter and one's not. So that's confusing. But this is the one I want because submix is where everything was dumping into, right? Into my submix channel. And as you notice, all these instruments, their output is submix. And that's what we wanted. But now what I'm going to do is actually route some of these tracks through these green tracks first, and then they should dump out to submix. So what I'm going to do is route all my drums to this drums track. So I'm going to select the kick through my overhead. So instead of my output for these 5 tracks being submix, I'm simply going to select them and choose drums. Okay. So you'll want to route the output of these tracks to the same bus that's coming to drums. So if I solo this, okay, they're coming through this drums bus. But if I mute the drums bus, we don't hear the drums, okay? Drum tracks come through the drums bus, which comes through my submix. Simple enough, right? Okay, that's what I've done with the drums. Now I'm going to take the bass all the way through the electric guitar, and I'm going to route those tracks to my band aux, okay? And then I'm going to route my vocals to the vocal bus. Now you'll notice I got one extra track here. It's the violin track. It's not a vocal yet. I haven't really used it yet. And the reason is because I'm still going in order of sonic importance and complexity. And I wanted to start with the piano and add the guitars and then add the drums and bass. So before we go any further with the buses, let's go ahead and get this violin track in there somewhere for the most part. I have a feeling that this track might need some work. I'm not really sure, so we'll maybe have to address something to it a little bit later. It was sort of an afterthought in the recording session, and it wasn't 100% concrete how it would play or where it might play. So let's go ahead and get that as part of the band submix. Let's move that track to be next to the other band instruments. And let's see if we can find a place for it. Flip back into mono, and we will unmute the violin. What I need to do is make sure that these buses are solo safed in Pro Tools, and other DAWs may probably do that. And what that means is they are always soloed. So if I solo one track, that usually mutes everything else, but it will not mute these buses, which is helpful because the sound has to travel through these buses to be heard. Make sense? We'll put EQ on this. High pass. Could have guessed that. Too much. All right, let's take a listen to it in context. Compressor. So no compression. Okay, so look at what I've done here. I don't really mix a lot of violin tracks, okay? And I didn't really go looking for a violin preset because I doubt we even have one. But what I knew is that the violin part is probably going to get buried somewhat. And it's not like a holding out legato part right here. It's a very percussive eighth notes, you know, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So what I needed to do is allow that percussive element to come out. And so I've got a real standard ratio of 3 to 1, nothing too strong, nothing too light. But what we did is started to adjust the attack and the release. And I noticed that the more I slowed down the attack, it allowed more of the initial violin hits or strums or bows to come through the compressor, so it wasn't cutting those off. And then I sped up the release a little bit so that it would let go of the compressor and be ready to compress again. And what that did was allow the violin actually to pop out a little bit more in the mix. It wasn't being suppressed a lot by the compressor. It was given a little bit more energy. Take a listen to it again. Bypass. Sure, it makes it a little bit louder, but it's making is all the strums a little bit louder. So let's take it a listen in context. So the compression allows it to kind of stay head to head with some of the other percussive elements. Now, the violin in my mind is a little out of tune, doesn't really sound that great. I probably should have addressed it in the editing phase. So we'll have to address it maybe in a later video. But for now, I've got it in the mix, I've got it bussed to the band bus, and I've got a volume there that kind of works where I know it's there. When I take it away, it's gone. But when I bring it back in, it doesn't mask or dominate the rest of my instruments. Okay, now what do we have here? We've got 3 buses, so I could easily mute the band, right? Or the drums. So now we've got some bussing going on. This is going to be helpful for 2 reasons. One, as you later see, if you want to do an overall volume change to the drums, if you need the drums to come down a little bit or to kind of swell up or have a little boost over a drum fill, you can do that right here with one fader, right? You don't have to adjust the balance of the drum tracks. Same thing with a band. If you need the instruments to come down a smidge or come up a smidge or the vocals, you've got a global fader to affect those. So it's very helpful. What's also helpful is that you can then put effects on these stereo buses or these stereo aux tracks that will affect the whole thing. If you want your drums to be a little brighter, you listen to your mix, you compare it to another mix, and you go, you know, those drums sound a little more crisp. You could make some changes here on a track by track basis, or you could simply put an EQ on this drums bus and brighten it up a little bit or take out some of the low end, and it will affect all of the drums. So you see how this is just a helpful infrastructure to have. And the more you mix, the more you should create some sort of template or some settings where you can just import tracks like this that are already kind of set up because you know you're always going to create them. Okay? You'll see more of how we use these bus tracks and these group tracks in a later video, more particular. But for now, let me show you another way that you can use buses, and that is with parallel processing, okay? The drums are a great place for this. What do I mean by parallel processing? Well, sometimes you want more compression, let's say, on the drums. You want more smack, more attack. But the more compression you put on the kick and the snare, or if I were to just slap a compressor on my drums bus, it will compress it more, but I could slowly but surely reduce so much of the dynamic range that you lose a lot of the natural energy and a lot of the beauty of the sound of the drum kit. You kind of just squeeze the life out of it. And maybe you've experienced that. Maybe you know that compression is helpful for drums and you've put compressor on the drum bus or on the drums themselves and you've overcompressed them and all of a sudden your drums sound lifeless. The problem isn't that compression is not going to help. The problem is that a lot of professional guys are blending a heavily compressed version of the drums with a non-compressed version of the drums. And so really you're hearing something that you can't get by either compressing or not compressing. You're hearing both, okay? Let me give you an example. We've got the drums. Let's go ahead and solo them. They're all dumping into this bus. What I want to do is create another stereo aux track, okay? And I'm going to call this P drums because it's going to be parallel drums or compression. You can call it whatever you want to call it. I'm going to solo safe this as well. I'm going to make sure that its output is the same as submix. And what I'm going to do is simply take these 5 drum tracks that already are outputting to drums, but I'm going to send them across a bus to this P drum. So it'll basically send another copy of the drums to another channel. Use a send, find P drums. Now they each have a send. Now what I need to do is bring up the volume of each. So the kick, the snare, the toms, and the overheads. Now what I have going on is all my drums going not only to my drums bus, but to my P drums bus. Let's take a listen. Okay? So I've muted the drums bus, but I'm still hearing drums on the P drums bus because these sends are sending a copy. See, the overheads are being sent. Toms come. Kick. So when I have the two playing together, the drums just sound louder because you're hearing twice the amount of drums. Okay. What we're going to do is take this P drums track and really overly exaggerate compression on it. Okay, so again, we can grab our typical compressor. And what we can do is press play and find a preset that looks like it's going to overly compress. Right, so it's really destroying the drums. It's just crushing them, okay? What we're going to do now is leave it as is, but bring the volume down. And then we're going to play back the normal drums. So these are the drums outputting to the drums bus. They're the slightly EQ'd, just lightly compressed drums that sound good and natural to us. And as we press play, we're simply going to fade in and blend in this other copy of the drums that's overly compressed to the point that we start to notice some of the fatness coming in. Let's take a listen. Take it away. Now, what we're getting is a blend of the nice natural sound and a little bit of the overly compressed sound. What I don't like is the overheads. It's totally compressing the overheads. The cymbals are getting just like they're getting louder and louder as I turn up the P drums. And so what you may find is that you don't like the cymbals being part of the parallel compression. Easy fix. Get rid of the send so that you're actually no longer sending overheads to that compression. Let's take a listen. Remember? Natural. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get a fatter, more aggressive kick and snare sound. Same thing with toms. It's going to keep any panning that you do stereo with the toms or what have you. But I decided to get rid of the overheads. That way I still just only hear the natural overheads the way they are. The cymbals won't compress and they won't warp and they won't get weird or they won't pump. The cymbals will stay clean and unaffected. There's no compression on the overheads as it is, and there's no compression on the drums bus. So now you have two faders that you can use to simply blend to taste the amount of fatness you want. So let's listen to it in context with the mix and see if we've got the level where we need it. All right, so we just have a little bit more fatness on the kick and the snare, and there's a little bit more aggression on the drums. Really simple thing. Experiment with parallel processing to be sure. The next way we can experiment with some other kind of parallel processing is with the bass guitar. Now, I think we got the bass sounding good. We use the EQ to scoop out a little bit of the low end that's just kind of flowy and woofy that we don't need to tighten up the bass a little bit. We also scooped out some of the mid-range mud, so what I got was a fatter, cleaner bass sound. Then we used some compression to really even out the bass performance, right? I think it really is sounding good. But one thing that's lacking, especially if you recorded a DI bass, meaning you plug the bass guitar right in, is you don't get a lot of that mid-range bite that you get if you mic'd up like a bass cabinet, or you had a little bit of overdrive on your bass cabinet. And sometimes that mid-range bite is what is needed for the bass line to cut through, especially on small speakers, especially on things like iPod earbuds. And so what I have grown accustomed to doing, because it always seems to work for me, is the bass fuzz technique. And it's basically a parallel compression, only it's not compression you're putting on the parallel track, it's distortion. So let's create a new bus or aux track, one, but it needs to be mono in this case. Because my bass track is mono, I don't need a stereo one, so I'll just make a mono one. And again, I'm going to double click this. I'm not going to treat it as a bus necessarily. I'm just going to give it a different color of blue. So it's like a second bass track, maybe if like I multi-track the bass. I'm going to call it bass fuzz. I need to set its output to be the same band output because I want it to be just like all my other instruments. Now right now there's nothing going into it. It's not an audio track. It's just a simply open track. So let's do like we did with the parallel compression on the drums. Let's do a send from the bass and send a copy of the bass to the bass fuzz track. Let's bring that up in volume. And what I'm going to do is click pre-fader here. by default in Pro Tools, your sends are post fader. And what does that mean? It's self-explanatory if you think it through. Post fader, which is the way my sends are by default, means the volume and everything about this send is based off of what happens post this fader. Meaning, if I am to mute, so let's press play. My bass is going into both tracks. But if I mute the bass track, then no sound is going into this bass fuzz track. This send is after or post whatever I do here. So this trumps it. But since I want this bass fuzz track to almost act independently with its own volume, with its own blend, if I want the bass fuzz on or off, muted or unmuted, I need it to act independently of whatever I do on the bass track, then that means I simply need this send to be pre-fader. In Pro Tools, there's a button here called pre. Your sends will probably have that somewhere in a different DAW. But now, what comes into the bass fuzz happens before any of this. It doesn't matter what I do to this. It doesn't affect the send before it. I'll show you. I'll mute the bass and you'll see it doesn't do anything. Right? It just muted the bass, but it hasn't muted this. Now I can mute the send, which is up here. But anything I do on the fader doesn't affect my sending to this track. Okay? Really, really helpful. What that is going to, again, allow me to do is allow them to work independently and have different volume levels. Because, again, if I have this as post fader by default, let's say I turn the bass down here, it's going to affect the bass fuzz. You can see the meter just go away because this send is affected by everything in this fader. Okay, lesson learned. All right, so make it pre-fader, so it's going to act independently. And now what we have is the same bass line coming in full volume to this track. Much like when we started with the parallel drums, it's not doing anything, it's just a copy of the bass guitar. It'll only make the bass sound louder. But this is where we want to experiment with some distortion or saturation. The best thing to do here is if you have an amp modeling plugin, like a guitar amp modeling plugin, and most of these DAWs come with some form of that, is to open one of those. You know, so whether it's like in Pro Tools, you get the Sans amp. And this just is basically a distortion modeling amp DI plugin. And you can go with presets or you can just experiment with the knobs here. I'm just going to experiment. You want to get a little bit of grit. And then you want to take out the low end. Right? So it's real mid-rangey, it's a little bit gritty, it's adding some harmonics to the bass, but you don't need the low end in there. Because you have plenty of low end in the other track. Now what I'm going to do is bring the volume of this down, just like we did with the parallel drums. And I'm going to press play, listen to the natural bass that's EQ'd nicely, it's compressed nicely, and I'm going to slowly fade up the bass fuzz and see if it adds a texture of harmonics in mid-range to the bass guitar. By itself. All right, so you see what we're doing here. Now let's listen to it in context with a mix. No bass fuzz. Okay, it's real subtle. And again, you may notice it differently on different speakers, but the more mid-rangey speakers you have and the less bottom end you have on your speakers, or let's say headphones, the more having this bass fuzz in there will make a huge difference. Trust me, you'll really feel the bass more in the mid-range when you can't hear it, because sometimes the bass is hard to hear, so it's a feel thing. So you'll want to experiment with your distortion plugin. You can even EQ it after the plugin if you want. This one happens to have a somewhat of an EQ on it. You don't want a lot of low end on this track. You just want the bite, the aggression, the mid-range, and you'll want to just experiment with it in the mix. All right, let's listen to everything in stereo for a second. You see where we're going with this? Just adds a little bit more of that mid-rangey to it. This is all using aux tracks or buses, using some of these group tracks to use parallel processing to your advantage. Once you see the power of being able to have a parallel track that you can process separately from the normal track and play them together, the possibilities are endless. So you can experiment with a ton of these things. Now let's quickly move on to some reverbs and delays, because those are the other two big things we're going to use with buses and tracks like that. I'm going to create two more stereo aux inputs, and I'm going to give these two a little bit different color. I'm going to give them a yellow, just so I know that they're not the group tracks. I'm going to call this one verb, and this one slap, and I'll show you why in a second. Same thing here. I want to make sure that all of these things are solo safe, so that they're always on unless we tell them to mute. I also want their outputs to be the same submix. And then what I want to do is create a reverb on this first track. Okay, just pull up any old reverb that you have in your DAW. Every DAW should have at least one reverb. And what I want to do is take a listen to, initially, a snare drum. Solo the snare. And the thing with reverbs are, what we're going to do with reverb, there's two things you want to do with reverb. One is you could use it for an effect. You may really want something to sound like it's really far away or in a big sense of space. What I'm going to use reverb for is the second reason, which is all of these tracks were recorded in a basement. Okay? They're recorded in a space that has no sense of space. They were recorded at different times. In fact, the drums, like I mentioned in the first video, were recorded in a different building than the rest of the band. They recorded in a small church. Similar type building, wasn't that one sounded better, it's just one had a little bit more space in it. So they're not even recorded in the same room. So here you have a song that's supposedly telling the listener that here's a band playing all together, but none of them actually played together. Using a little bit of a reverb that gives just a little bit of a sense of space and running most of the tracks through it can really help gel your tracks together, because they all share some tonality in the reverb. So it's a real simple way to get some glue and some unity into your tracks. So what we want is something that's real mild, like a plate. And I'm sure there's some settings here. Let's see. Plate ambience. Let's start with that. I'm going to send, and this is what we do. I put a reverb on a global track so that we can use sends to send any and all tracks we want to that one reverb. You don't put a reverb on every single track. That'll take up way too much processing power. You want to pick one reverb and send some of these tracks to it. So let's send my snare drum to the verb bus, which is right there. And I'm going to slowly bring it up and take a listen. All right, so I've got a little bit sense of a room space there. Maybe I kind of dig that. So let's go ahead, copy that, send to my toms. Let's copy it to my acoustic guitar, piano, my electrics, and the violin. Let's take a listen. So what you're getting is a little bit of a glue here. Now with this reverb, you have a high frequency cut, which is going to allow you to basically dial down some of the high frequencies in the trail. So what you can do is take this high frequency cut and sort of say, you know, does it sound like the reverb's a little bit bright or harsh? You can dial down what the reverb's high frequency lets you have. So just a little bit more subtle in the mix. Right? So you get the feel of what's going on here. And if you feel like you've got too much reverb going, dial down the sends a little bit. Take these sends, dial them down, and send a little bit less of every instrument to the reverb. You want it to be somewhat audible to you so that if you take out the reverb, you notice that something's missing, but you don't want it to be that drastic that it sounds like you're in an echo chamber and then when you turn it off, it's in a dry room. The point is to have a little bit of a blend. All right, so it gives you just a little bit of a sense of space. It's a good starting point. We'll adjust it as we need to as the mix goes on. It just puts a little bit of glue to your mix, all right? The second one I've got here is called slap, and this is sort of optional. This is where you can put either a specific reverb or a really short delay that gives you a sense of like a back wall, like there really is a specific room size and you can use it to move tracks forward or back. Let me show what I mean. Let's grab, in this case, I'm going to grab a delay. So I'm going to grab like a very short delay in Pro Tools. These are time-based, so they can lock to the tempo of the song, which is really cool. Let's take the acoustic guitar as an example, and let's send it to this delay. Slap. See if we can, how long will this delay go? So that's too short in my mind. Let's take a listen to it in stereo. So I want something that's a little bit longer than that. So I'm going to take my delay and find a medium delay. Because that sounded kind of like a chorus effect to me. What I want is something that I can definitely tell, maybe let's do 16th notes, that it's just hitting a wall. Right? So without it, it's got a certain depth. With it cranked up, it feels like it's more in a room, it's moving further back. So the idea here is, and we'll pop it back into mono, the idea here is you can use it to place things in the mix, okay? So if you really needed to push something further back, you could do that. Right, so like a good example might be maybe the violin track. Maybe we take this over here. Let me find a place for the violin. Right, it's got a sense of space. I can turn the violin track down a little bit, you know, so I don't need it as loud. So it becomes a helpful tool to know, okay, I've got this slap track or this really short or medium delay. If any of my tracks as I progress in the mix need a little bit more depth, I need to push them away because the listener is drawn to whatever sounds closest. And whatever is driest sounds closest. So if you have a really wet vocal, it sounds far away. But if the vocal is real dry and up in your face, it sounds really intimate and people pay attention to it. If you don't want people to pay that much attention to an instrument, give it a little bit more verb or a little bit more delay, and it'll be buried just a little bit more in the mix, okay? It gives you a sense of depth. This is a great starting point for using buses, knowing that you can use them for parallel processing and also knowing that you can use them for delays and reverbs. In the next video, when we look at vocals, you're going to see how we're going to use a very specific delay and apply that to the vocals as well. But the more you can think about how you could use a reverb or delay, set up as many of these as you need and bus things to it left and right, and you have a lot of options to you. So far, we've got the mix coming together. Let's take a listen in stereo, and then let's bypass everything and see where we're coming from. Here all I'm doing is realizing that my compressor is turning down everything just a hair. I just cranked the gain up 0.6 dB to make sure that the volume match was closer. I don't want this to make my mix louder. I just want to make it the same volume. So when I bypass it, it's the same volume, it just loses the compression. There we go. Right, so we're getting a little bit more focused sound, a little bit more sense of space with the verb and delay, and a little bit more attack and aggression with the parallel compression on the drums, and some mid-rangey stuff on the bass. We'll see you on the next video where we'll attack our vocals. Well, here we are in video 5 of the Rethink Mixing series. What we have done is simply taken raw tracks and using nothing but some EQ, a little bit of compression, a little bit of reverb, and maybe a little bit of saturation on the bass and the snare drum, we have pretty much focused in some of those tracks, cut them away, and allowed things to really soak in nicely together. We're getting a clearer, more punchier, raw mix, as it were. But so far, all we've got is the instruments, and we have no vocals in the mix. Now, I want to add vocals in this video, and I saved them for a video on their own for two reasons. One, because they're worth spending a little bit of time just thinking about the vocals and not having to worry about the other instruments, because I approach them just slightly differently. But two, a lot of times, this is how I mix. I really will mix the complex instruments, the drums, complex pianos and guitars that have a lot of tones, a lot of frequencies, and I'll try to make those fit together with EQ and compression, and then leave room for the vocals, because the very end, whatever I add the vocals on, it'll just sit right on top of whatever I've done in the mix. And it's not a complex instrument tonality wise to mix, I think, so it really makes it come along quicker, and I feel like I can get a vocal sound relatively quickly. So I want to spend a lot of my time on the complex stuff, which we've already done. So now I want to introduce the vocals, and here I have 3 vocal tracks. I have the lead vocals, which is called Vox, and then I have the singer, his name's Josh. I have a harmony track and then a doubled harmony track. And if you take a look, I think, if I find where he's singing here, you can tell right here, obviously, this is his main vocal track. Sings a little bit in the verses, sings all the way to the end. There's harmony tracks. He sings harmonies a lot of places here in this song. He has harmonies on a lot of the song. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on vocally. What we want to do first is get the lead vocal in there. Pretend like there's no harmonies. The lead vocal is the most important part, and I want it to sit nicely in the mix. And then I'm going to bring in the harmonies. So I'm going to flip us back to mono, because I want to get the balance and the EQ and the masking and compression all done in mono. Remember, worst case scenario, I don't want to be fooled by the bigness of our stereo mix. And so let me unmute the vocal and let's see what we're dealing with. We'll get to the same section of our song so we can loop it all together. Again, we're mixing this bigger part of the song. Let's see, select here, select here. Here we go.
Tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar, and in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart, but in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar, and in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart, but in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar, and in this death.
You see what I've done here? As you guessed it, a high pass filter. I had it up closer to 200. I dialed it back. It started to sound a little thin to me in the mix, but the more we play with the mix, the more you can adjust that. It's still cutting off at least up to 140. And then I kind of played around with the frequency up here in the mid-range, and I found a spot around 730 hertz that kind of sound honky and just woofy. I don't know, it just sounded like it's probably not a pleasing part of his voice. And what I did is just pulled that out about 2 dB. And what it does is allow the breathiness or some of the sparkle in his voice to be more apparent without me boosting anything. And that allows his mix to cut through. Now it's going to be quieter. Right now his vocal got quieter because I've cut out volume. And we're going to bring that back with compression. But I just wanted to show you what I was doing.
In this death I tremble,
Bypass.
my sin a perfect match for every scar, and in this death I remember.
All right, so let's get a compressor in here. Now with vocals, compression is trying to do one main job, I think, in my mind. A compressor, again, is, if you remember from either my previous videos or if you've spent a lot of time with compression, it simply is an automated volume fader adjuster. Okay, it's basically what it is. It's a way for the computer or a hardware box to know, please turn up the volume whenever it gets too quiet. Because it basically does the opposite. It turns down the volume whenever it gets too loud, and then it brings up the overall volume of the track. So what that can do is, if we look at his vocals right here, he's got a wide range of dynamics. You know, this word is a medium dynamic. This word's a little quieter. This vowel or word is really loud. A compressor is simply going to take this peak and turn it down so that it's a lot more similar to these peaks, and then it'll allow me to turn all these peaks up. So it's a roundabout way of saying, let me turn up all these peaks to be about as loud in apparent volume as the loudest peak. Okay, makes sense? So what we want is a consistent performance on the vocal, because I want to hear every word, right? Vocals are so important, so we need to hear every word of his vocal, and a compressor is going to do that. So I'm going to engage the same compressor we have here, the same dynamics, compressor 3. And we'll look for a vocals preset, we'll analyze the way it's sounding, and we will tweak from there.
This death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. In this death I tremble.
So you see what it's doing? It's got a relatively low ratio on this vocal comp setting, only 1.8, and a medium attack and release, but it's doing a lot of compression, so I can turn up the gain a good amount, and it's basically allowing his words to be delivered at the same intensity, the same volume. I hear everything. It's real present in the microphone, okay? So what you'll want to do is experiment with that ratio. That could be fine. That could be totally fine for your mix. Now, some people think that you can get a better sound by not pushing a compressor too hard, but instead using 2 compressors back to back on a vocal. I've heard this from Chris Lord-Alge, other people as well. It's something worth experimenting with. Let me show what I mean. If we look at my settings here, I'm going to have a lot of gain reduction.
In this death I tremble.
So it's compressing a lot, -6. How about we dial the threshold up a bit so it's not compressing as much?
In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar.
And then I'm going to Option or Alt drag a copy of the exact same compressor right after the first compressor. Okay, so my vocal gets EQ'd out a little bit, and then that vocal gets compressed a little bit, and then that compressed vocal is going to get compressed a little bit. Let's take a listen.
In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar.
It almost has that same upfront sound that the compressor, the first one, had when I was really compressing it. So let me turn the volume down, because now the vocal is louder than we need it to be.
In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. In this death I tremble.
So that's what we started with, the vocal at a volume that we needed it to be to hear it, but and it sounds fine, but you're like, okay, it's a little buried, and that's kind of where we get some amateur sounding vocals on mixes out of home studios. Is there's nothing wrong with a vocal. The vocals are relatively easy instrument to record. You know, it's just like one mic about a foot away from your face, but you know, you may be mixing, and this may be your vocal sound right here.
In this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar.
When he goes, sin a perfect match for every. When he goes down to those notes, you lose it, right? You lose some of his vocals because it's a little quieter. It's not as big of a vowel sound, so he kind of disappears. That's why we need to EQ, so there's not a lot of low frequency buildup, and so the breathiness of his voice can be more apparent. And then B, compress either with one compressor or maybe a couple of compressors lightly compressing, and bury the fader a little bit closer so that you just have a more upfront vocal sound. Let's take a listen.
In this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember.
And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the ratio here to 3-to-1 on both of these compressors. So it will actually do a little bit more compressing, and I'm going to adjust that. I think it's not compressing enough.
In this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. In this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar.
You see, you get a much more even vocal performance, and it sounds like he's jumping out of the speakers a little bit more, and that's what you want. That's why you use compression on, especially on a vocal, because it's such a dynamic instrument. Vocals really jump all over the place in a good way, and what we need is to somehow rein that in, somehow allow his vocals to be squeezed a little bit so there's a narrower range that it can jump in terms of loud or quiet, and then present that range a little closer to the audience so we can hear every word, every nuance, every breath as we want to in the mix. And compression done nicely on a vocal can really, really make that happen. So start with a preset. If you think you're over compressing, dial it back and maybe copy an alternate of the same compressor right below it. That can be really helpful. Another thing we look at with vocals is the S sibilance sound, okay? What you know that you notice that when you hear ts, ts, and sometimes the T sounds, the vocal is delivering the vocals best as it can, but those frequencies on the tongue, on the lips, they stick out and they become very loud and aggressive in a mix. And it's natural in our voices, but in a mix, it's not natural. It sticks out as something as a problem, and it's somewhat amateur. So there's something called a de-esser that can help tame that vocal. Let me see if we can listen to his S's.
In this death that tremble,
Okay, the very first line, in this.
in this death that tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar.
Okay, now his S's aren't too bad, but on some of the tracks I did for this album, the S's just really came through really hot in the microphone. But either way, you can always tame those S's so it's a little more palatable. Now, what a de-esser is, and most DAWs have one, and you find it under your dynamics category because it is a compressor, basically. If someone got smart and took a compressor that basically is keyed to a certain frequency, right? So it's almost like an EQ and a compressor working together. So it is a compressor that will turn down the volume of only certain frequencies that it hears, which we want to turn down the S frequencies. Now, how do you know which frequency is the S? Well, it depends if you're male or female, and it depends on the microphone they used, and it depends on the voice themselves. The great thing is that these de-essers give you a listen function most of the time that allows you to listen just to the S sounds, the sounds that it's looking for, the frequency knob. And when you find the most offensive sound, that's where you leave the frequency knob. So let's take a listen on listen mode. Let's try that again. So 6.6, it sounds pretty bad. 7.8, it might be somewhere in between there. So what we can do is choose high frequency only, and we'll press play and adjust the arrange knob, and that's kind of like a threshold, like how much is it going to compress. And you're going to see if this is the frequency spectrum from 500, so like half of the frequency spectrum, 500 to 16K, you'll see it compress just the high end portion of his voice.
In this death I tremble, my sin. In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death,
you see the gain reduction, and it's not just happening only on S's, it's happening on F's, it's happening sometimes on a T. It's gonna, anything that it sees in that 7.8 kilohertz range, it's gonna clamp down on. So what we can do is play with how much it clamps down, and then we can even sweep around on the frequencies in context with a mix a little bit and see if it tames it.
in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death,
Let's bypass it.
in this death I tremble, in this death I tremble.
You hear how subtle that is, but how much better it is? So here is it originally.
In this death, in this death, in this death, in this death.
It's turning down the S. I mean, that's basically what it's doing. It's making it a little softer, more palatable.
In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace.
All right? And so far, all we've done is high pass a bit of the vocal out, carve out a bit of the mid-range muddiness in his vocal, a little bit of compression on the compression, and a little bit of compressing his high frequencies of the DSs, so that we get a less muddy, a little more clear, a little more evenly sung, less annoyingly est vocal performance. Okay, we haven't done anything to change his voice. We haven't done anything magic to make it sound like a rock star. The vocal is going to sound the way the vocal sounds, but it's compression, I think, that gets it sort of in your face and like makes it sound a little bit larger than life. So let's listen to before and after with the plugins on the vocals.
In this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace.
All right, it's subtle, but it makes a big, big difference. What I want to do is get these harmonies involved. I want to find out where they belong in the mix, okay? Because this is part of the vocal sound, especially in a song like this where there is vocals on this entire chorus, okay? The same section we've been singing over and over again, listening to over and over again, excuse me, is the same one we're going to mess with here on the harmony vocals. So he's got a vocal line that follows a majority of the line. In this death, I tremble, and it goes all the way on, and there's maybe a couple of gaps where he just lets the lead vocal cut through. But what we want to do is listen to it with the harmonies.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember.
Okay, so harmonies are very subjective. In this song, I definitely want to feel them. I definitely want to hear them because it's this big chorus compared to where we will have come from as we look to later in this mixing series. This is going to make the mix and the chorus sound big. So I definitely want them to be there, but I don't want them to take over the lead vocal. I think a tasteful harmony is one that supports the lead vocal, and you almost don't know that it's there, but if you took it away, it would totally be lacking. So volume is going to be key, getting the right balance. But the same thing here. We definitely don't want those muddy frequencies in the vocals on the harmony. So I'm going to get rid of the same things. I'm going to add similar compression. Look at me, I'm just copying it over. And I'm going to copy over the same de-esser. Why not start there?
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart.
So what I'm going to do is get rid of the second compressor because it was just making it louder than I needed it to be.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart.
Okay, so it's doing a heavy amount of gain reduction, but I think it's helping that harmony stay toe to toe with his lead vocal. I'm going to listen to the other harmony.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death
Both of them.
I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this
All right. And we got the similar thing with the de-esser going on just to tame there's some of their S's if we have them. Let's listen to it with the mix.
and in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace.
Right? I think that's a tasteful place for them. They're going to be compressed enough. They're going to not drop off too much. And then I can control the overall volume with just their faders, okay? So far, let's take a quick listen to how things are sounding in stereo.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death
All right. So back in mono, what we want to do is look at the ambience of the vocal because we put a little bit of reverb on everything to kind of glue it together. And I don't want a completely dry vocal right up in my face that sounds like it was recorded in a guy's closet with a bunch of clothes as it was. Instead, I want to give it something that's a little bit larger than life. If this were the 80s, we would probably just slap on a reverb unit and just drown it out in the bigness and the sweetness of reverb. And that was stylistic at the time. I've grown accustomed to liking drier sounds, so the compromise in my mind is a delay. A good vocal delay can give the vocal that sense of space and ambience and wetness that you need it to have, so it's bigger than just being a little voice right in your face, but without making it sound like it's drowning in wetness and that it's really far away. It keeps it close yet spacious at the same time. Let me show you the way I like to do vocal delays. I'm going to open up another global effects return here. So I'm going to make another stereo aux track. And I'll make it the same yellow. Why not? And I'm going to call this Vox delay. Because I'm pretty much only going to use it for the vocals as far as I know. I'm going to solo save it so the delay is always soloed unless I mute it. And I'm going to make its output my master fader submix, just like everything else. That's where the effect needs to dump. And then I'm going to grab a delay. And I'm going to go back to the same built-in delays in Pro Tools, only I'm going to go longer and grab the extra long delay. Okay, again, this is just a simple time-based digital delay. And what I need to do is solo my lead vocal, and I need to send it to the Vox delay. Going to bring it up. And what I'm going to do is here in a delay like this, and a lot of DAWs have something like this. It's time-based, so it can tell the tempo of your song. And I may not know what millisecond delay is going to sound right, but I want it to be maybe a eighth note or a quarter note of the song. So let's try eighth note. And let's take a listen.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match.
Right? So bump, bump, that's the eighth note. Whereas a quarter note delay.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every.
All right, it makes one exact copy a quarter note later. Okay, so there's a couple things I would change here. First is I want to create some more feedback. Feedback is how many times it actually echoes. All right, I don't want just one echo. I want it to repeat and kind of die off.
And in this death.
Right? Okay, that's what we think of when we think of delays usually. The other thing is I want to kind of use this LPF or low pass filter, which is the opposite of a high pass filter, to cut off the high frequencies on the delay. Not on his lead vocal, but just on what comes through the delay, because what that'll do is make his delay sound more muffled. So I'm going to drag this down to maybe, 2K, 2000 hertz. So getting rid of a lot of intelligibility of the vocal.
And in this death I tremble.
So, okay, it's a little bit more muffled, and you can play with how muffled you want it to be. Now let's listen to it in context with a mix.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for.
Turn his send down so I'm not hearing as much reverb or delay, excuse me.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion.
Right? So now you'll adjust the fader there. I'm still listening to it in mono, okay? Which is hard because it doesn't sound as cool, but it also is forcing me to see, do I feel or hear the texture in mono when they don't have much of a sense of space? So what I'm going to do is press play again, and then I'm going to be muting his send to the delay and bringing it back and seeing if I miss it. If I mute it and I don't miss it, then it was never loud enough in the first place, meaning I didn't really notice it. But if I mute it and all of a sudden I totally am like, wow, it's way different, then it may be too drastic of a volume, and I'll just adjust it here. So let's experiment.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this.
So it's hard to tell. I think I did notice it being gone at the end of phrases, so I might bump it up a smidge. And maybe I'll reduce the LPF a little bit more. But the opposite could be true. You may want to roll up the high frequency so you actually can tell the presence of the delay a little bit more. That's going to be a subjective call. At this point, I would say that's a good start. Let me go ahead and get rid of that delay. And let me copy that over to my harmonies.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember.
All right. What we can do is pop it over into stereo and see what things sound like.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember
right, so two things here. One, I'm going to copy the reverb send over to these tracks as well to send them a little bit to this reverb that we were using to glue them together and see what that does.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace.
All right. Now, when we're in stereo, here's something I really like to do. My delay is on a stereo track, and I did that for a reason. I like to slightly offset the delays from the left to the right. Okay? So I kind of like to make my left one just a few milliseconds sooner of a delay than the other one. Take a listen.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect.
So now the delay is gone away from the middle, but to the left and the right. Because you hear that it always was on the left and the right, but now they're hitting at separate times. So your ear perceives it as, wow, he's singing in the middle, his delays are off to the left, it spreads out his vocal and makes it sound wider.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar.
There you have it. You got the delay going. You can experiment with how much or how little you want for the song. And as we will discover in a later video, how much or how little delay is almost dependent on which part of the song you're in. It doesn't always stay the same. So experiment with that for now. Check it in mono. That's really where you're going to want to start experimenting with the amount of delay or reverb on the vocal. And then flip it over to stereo and see how things are working. Play with a stereo delay or a mono delay. Either is fine. But when it comes to vocal mixing, that's about where I will get things on a static mix. The right EQ, a little bit of compression to get that vocal up front, a little bit of de-essing just to tame the S's a little bit, and then the right delay and maybe a hair of reverb just to get the vocals to sit somewhere in the mix and have a sense of bigness, a sense of space. Let's take a listen to where we've come from so far.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember the rebellion of my heart. But in this death I find my peace in the suffering of one, knowing that these hands and feet prove the saving work is done. And in this death I tremble.
Very nice. Let's take a look at our master bus compression and see how that's looking.
And in this death I tremble, my sin a perfect match for every scar. And in this death I remember.
Looks good. Not compressing too much, keeping it all tame. That's mixing your vocals. In the next video, we're going to look at how we can start to sweeten this track and actually enhance it a little bit more and look at the overall arrangement of the other sections of the song.